All right, here we go. This is it. First episode of a new podcast na I've been really looking forward to also this kind of podcast. So for quite some time, one of the things I realized, gentlemen, is that, when it comes to the Philippines, marami tayong mga magagaling na analysts, experts, academics. You can go on and on and on. But I think what one thing we really have to build on is this kind of hindi naman ilustrado for the 21st century, but something like kind of, solidaridad, a group together, group things, sharing ideas. And I always say, there's no need to compete to be the Philippine analyst. I think there's enough room for everyone to succeed and thrive. And in that spirit, I've been very happy. I've been very inspired to see a new generation. Di pa naman ako matanda, but a new generation of analysts rising. And in fact, a few months ago, I was just thinking, let's just make a recommendation about this new analyst and all. Next thing I know, the responses were very positive. Just in case may mga weird people na nag-add sa inyo, baka ako may kasalanan. so I just felt it's time, to get the ball rolling, to work together, and to make sure the spotlight covers everyone and all great ideas. And I notice all of you gentlemen, of course, we'll have more inclusivity down the road. This is just the first efforts. Is all of you have had backgrounds in governments or are still in government or are advising the government, perhaps informally. So it's not like we're just armchair people. We have had direct interaction with the government and sometimes as policymakers or policy advisors in different capacity throughout different administration. Having said that, thank you very much again for joining us. Let's go one by one. Yung pahamak muna natin yung isang nasa gobyerno pa rin. Sir Miko, maybe a bit of background about you, Sir Miko. I mean, how did you get involved in the West Philippine Sea analysis? How did you get hooked on the whole West Philippine Sea issue? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Sir Prof. Richard, and good evening to my colleagues, Joshua and Justin. So I started to be interested here in the South China Sea in around 2012, when the Scarborough Shoal incident happened. I was still in college then. So my bachelor's degree is political science, and as all of you know, political science is about branches. I decided to focus on international relations, and then after graduation, I got employed at the National Defense College of the Philippines. At the time, during the Aquino administration, so the issue then, as it is now, is still among the top foreign policy challenges of the country. So I decided to focus my research on the South China Sea issue. Got myself published in a number of publications.
Right.
Most of my writings are about the South China Sea, and then after I obtained my master's degree from UP Diliman, also my master's thesis is also partially about the South China Sea as well.
Right.
And when I got an opportunity to teach at De La Salle and UST, I also delivered lectures on the South China Sea issues, got to talk to policymakers, being NDC as a think tank of the Defense Department. I tried to focus most of my research there, and now as a military officer, as a core professors of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, I still focus my research on those issues. So that's a brief background. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity again.
Salamat, Miko. We'll do more marites about your work and all of that, short of getting you fired later on. Thank you so much for getting the ball rolling. Ikaw, Justin, Mr. Justin Bakisal, can you also share about a little bit about your background and how you got into the business? Alam ko you guys are also quite, you made some waves also in the Shangri-La Dialogue not long ago. Along with another good friend of ours, si Commodore J. Tariela. So kayo mga pasaway sa Singapore. Can you give us some idea about the whole drama and how did you arrive at where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I started working on West Philippine Sea issues more than 10 years ago. So aftermath is also same as Nico nung Scarborough Shoal standoff. So 2012 was a really talagang historical marker for us. So afterward, the Philippines filed a case against China, right, with the arbitral tribunal. Now, we developed an organization called the National Movement for the West Philippine Sea.
Right.
We focused particularly on basically talagang building up support for and explaining to the people why we had to file a case with China at a time when people were very skeptical of the merits of filing that case to begin
Right.
with in 2015. And then, of course, 10 years later, I'm still in the same organization. I'm the Vice President for External Affairs, so I try to build up the network
Right.
for that organization. it's a global movement now. We have members in Pag-asa Island, so they're directly affected by them.
Right.
Tinutulungan namin yung mga bata sa Pag-asa Island. We give them donations for school supplies, and every time they have a graduation, we also make sure that we show support to them para magkaroon ng effective human presence in the area.
Right.
And then in between all of that, I work in the government, first with the Office of the President, under the time ni President Duterte, and then of course I moved to the Department of National Defense. So in both cases, I was doing strategic assessments and planning. So that's my background on the West Philippine Sea issue.
Okay, we'll go back to Duterte later on. Your time there. We have a lot to discuss. Now, ikaw, Josh Espena. No, hindi Espanya, Espena, just to be clear about it. Josh, kamusta? What about you? How did you arrive at this? I mean, of course, the first time we met is when you kindly made sundo to me to give a talk dun sa... So you used to be in the AFP, right? Can you give us a little bit background
Yes,
about us?
oo.
Yeah.
Buti naman naalala mo pa yun. Akala
Of
ko
course.
makalimutan mo na. Well,
Anong tingin niyo sa akin? Marites ako, ha? Marites ako.
Oo. I started my work back in 2017 as an educator. Actually, napaka-striking ng question. Sir, tinanong ako ng student ko, a STEM student. So usually, ito yung mga walang pake. Actually.
Yeah.
I was asked, sir, what is this West Philippine Sea? Where is it and why should we care? Nag-step back ako actually. Kung paano ko sasagutin to sa mga taong walang pake, walang time actually. So, mula noon talagang itong mga estudyante na to na yung naging inspiration ko to do my homework actually. Then after ng brief time ko doon sa first education job ko, I moved to the AFP, specifically doon sa Office for Strategic Studies and Strategy Management, o yung tinatawag nilang awesome. Actually, that's how we say it there. So, ito yung sabihin na natin personal staff ni CISA, Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines. So, I got there noong 2019 and doon ko nakilala si Miko personally. Pero actually, before ko pa siya makilala, medyo nauna-una na kasi siya. So, quite a fan, so to speak, ni Pareng Miko. And then, we formally met back in 2019, November, sa isang Track to ASEAN institute na meeting sa may Clark. So doon kami nagkakilala. And then I'm also a graduate student ng time na yon and working on my thesis on naval diplomacy ng Australia, Japan, and India to the Philippines. So I'm trying to work on why in the world states are using these things na akala natin dapat hindi na ginagamit sa international relations. Pero lo and behold, di ba? States are using militaries to get what they want. So sabi ko, mukhang magandang career to At nakakatawa lang kasi boom, pumasok ako sa PUP as a lecturer now. So historically speaking, alam naman natin ang kwento ng PUP when it comes to their sentiment to the military. Pero nakakatuwa lang kasi when I introduced yung strategic studies for 2 years now, actually going 3 years na siya, very receptive yung mga students. Sir, ganun pala yung paggamit ng military. May tama at may mali. Exactly. So I've been helping them to make sense how do you use it. Kasi sinasabi kong framing lagi, sabihin na natin you disagree with some things that governments do, but at the same time, hindi natin may iwasan that militaries are tools of the state. So gagamitan ng pera. They love spouting yung tinatawag natin good governance. So sabi ko, dito niyo ipasok yung good governance. How do we allocate our defense budget? Well, si Justin, maraming masasabi yan later. Pero doon ko sila piniframe. And they're really convinced na, okay nga, sir, no? So aside from teaching, I'm also a resident fellow sa think tank, International Development and Security Cooperation since 2021. And ako yung sabihin na natin strategic studies guy nila sa loob ng IDLC. And thriving itong think tank na yun actually.
This is with Dr. Chester Cabalza, right?
Oo.
Yes.
Tama. Kina Dr. Chester Cabalza, which was, by the way, my former teacher. Kasi after kong lumabas sa AFP, nasa radar niya na pala ako na nagsusulat on the West Philippine Sea issue. So, he decided na i-recruit ako for this organization. I'm very happy kasi IDSC and PUP has been my home for years now to
Right.
allow me to speak my thoughts on West Philippine Sea, etc.
Thank you very much, Josh. I was a bit worried that you'll get into the analysis. Parang wait lang, may mga episodes pa tayo for that. Yeah. Yes, relax lang, gentlemen. The reason we made this podcast is precisely to make sure na we can go, yung masinsinan, hindi lang mga pa-cute, hindi lang yung mga cloud chaser style na, admittedly sometimes I had to do that also on Twitter because no choice, you have to get people's attention so that you do the right thing. As Socrates said, you have to seduce people into truth. So self-admittedly, sometimes we have to be a little bit exaggerated. But at the end of the day, dito makakaalaman sa podcast kung may alam ka or hindi. Kasi within 1 hour, obvious na kung wala ka talagang alam, pakit lang ang ginagawa mo. So of course, I'm not going to be presumptuous. I mean, first of all, just to be clear, this is not the final composition, just in case sabi ng iba, but puro mga gentlemen. We look forward to this group to expand. In fact, one of our friends, Don, Macklin Gill is also supposed to join us. Unfortunately, is I think under the weather right now, so we hope he can join us in the future. This is kind of a mini movement, right? A podcast that we believe is part of a broader movement. So please don't bash us and say bakit puro kayo mga lalaki dyan, etc. Don't worry, we're gonna fix that thing sooner than later, hopefully. Now going back to this, of course, not to be presumptuous, I'm Richard Hidarian. I'm currently teach at the University of the Philippines Asian Center. And I used to teach also in LaSalle. I also used to teach in PUP, and I think nakasabay kami ni Josh when they asked me to be the professorial chair for geopolitics. So I was very happy to do that during pandemic time too, no? So 2021, etc. So I'm very glad that different universities coming in. I also taught at Ateneo de Manila University. Now, how did I get into the whole West Philippine Sea issue? Well, I used to work in the Philippine government legislature. I advised at least a senator, so I advised also a congressman. They happen to be smartest people. I mean, I'm talking about people like Miriam Defensor, Walden Bellio, so pretty big people, right? I had to deal with back in the day. And I remember very well, I was in a Foreign Affairs Committee kind of hearing when the whole West Philippine Sea issue in Scarborough Shoal came to fore. And after going through all of that, I never looked back. I never looked back. So for the next years, probably what 2,000-3,000 articles, one way or another, has to do something with South China and the Philippines, and a number of books on this. Anyway, this is not about me. Looking forward to other. I just didn't want to be presumptuous. Nakilala tayo ng mga tao, so I just had to introduce myself very quickly. Now. Let's start with the big questions. I mentioned Socrates a while ago. We'll go Aristotelian in the next episode. We'll start tactical, operational. But now let's talk grand strategy, big questions. Now, since medyo nagfe-feeling ilustrado of the 21st century tayo, medyo young Turks, let me ask this question, gentlemen. Maybe I'll start with Justin, and then we can go from there. Do you think this is the moment? Because remember, Benedict Anderson famously argued that, nations are imagined communities, right? And the process of imagination is crystallized through common victories and common, tragedies, right? And usually, if you look at anthropology, schismogenesis, how First Nations came about, nations always came about in juxtaposition or contraposition to something else, right? I can start with the first heroic societies in Turkey versus the Babylonian counterpart, and then we can go on and on with Germany, Prussia versus France. So the tendency is that nationalism and nationhood has a lot to do with questions of war and peace. Has a lot to do also with the urgent sense of dealing with the threat from without. And you may disagree with me, right? Maybe this is a very UP stance, but my argument always has been that one of the problems with us in the Philippines is that we have been in the shadow of a superpower for quite some time. In fact, the institutions of the Philippines are very much patterned after America. In fact, 19th century America, late 19th century America, and the Philippine Constitution, jurisprudence. Yes, there was 300 years of Spain, European power, but in many ways, I would argue that we kind of outsource our external security exigencies and needs to the United States throughout the Cold War period and throughout the 20th century, to be honest, even when we gained our supposed formal independence. So my way of looking at it, and please go ahead and disagree with me, is that this West Philippine Sea issue, this is the glue that is bringing us, the Filipino people, together. In fact, yung pagiging Filipino natin, yung pagiging excited natin, has a lot to do with how we are pushing back and resisting the bullying that is happening in the West Philippine Sea. And the reason I say this is because, a lot of us have relatives in the United States. A lot of us relatives who actually are in the American armed forces. And I heard that there are many Pinoys, second generation Pinoys, who are more than happy to be stationed in the Philippines under EDCA, etc., because they want to fight for their motherland, even if they're Americans, second generation and Philippine Americans. So for me, I think something bigger is happening here. This is not just a territorial dispute, as important as it is. This is not just a maritime issue. This is an existential national identity issue. This is like what the Rizal and Ilustrados were facing in the late 19th century, right? This emerging sense of what it is to be a Filipino. Am I exaggerating this? Am I reading too much into this, Justin? What is your take on this? This national consciousness, nationalism aspect to this.
No, I fully agree with you. No, I think yung juncture ngayon is very important because we're seeing the birth of historical consciousness in the Philippines when it comes to our geopolitical interests. In the past, of course, we've had colonial subjugation, of course, but really we were focused on internal security threats after that. So even after independence from America, 1946, formally, after that we had the Hukbalhap rebellion, and so it's really very inward looking, right? But right now we are being defined by an external threat in much of the same way that other Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia or Malaysia
Right.
have been defined by an external threat at the moment of the birth of their country.
Right, right.
So right now, I think what we're seeing is yung rejuvenation of that sense, pride of place nga, ika nga, of where the Philippines stands, that a lot of countries right now, they talk about de-risking from geopolitics and so
Right.
and of course deconflicting. But the Philippine case is opposite because we are right at the center of the geopolitical conflicts between the US and China, between ASEAN and China,
Right.
and in our own geopolitical conflicts with China. So even if some of us aren't interested in geopolitics, geopolitics is certainly interested in
Very
the Philippines.
Trotsky.
Exactly.
Trotsky. Yeah.
So, I think going forward, no, I think this is a very important period for the Philippines. Na right now we are having conversations about how to deal with the threat that is China. I think everybody can understand the threat that is China, but what is the operational response to China, right? So those are the things we're trying to work out right now. Whether it's a policy of trying to have good relations with China, if that is enough to make them stop bullying in the West Philippine Sea, or whether we need to have a more of a muscular foreign policy, trying to bring in, for example, more concrete military assets, trying to enlist foreign support in the theater of operations and so forth. No? So our generation specifically is grappling with these questions, right?
Right.
And right now, of course, the AFP is also grappling with this question, right? As it shifts yung focus niya from internal security. This year, the AFP declared that it now has a strategic victory of the Communist Party of the Philippines. So the internal security threat, which many have known for a long time, isn't really the major security issue in the country anymore, right? So it's really the external security threat. So right now, all the different sectors, whether that's civil society, the manong and manang in the street, they know what the threat from China is. Our own
Right.
AFP right now, medyo may institutional soul searching na nagaganap. How do you reconfigure your force structure to address an external security problem, which they haven't done historically, right, since World War II. So all of these things, yan ang nangyayari sa Pilipinas ngayon. We are witnessing, of course, the rejuvenation of our historical consciousness, but at the same time, there are different interpretations of how we imagine this national community.
Thank you very much for that, Justin. Miko, I mean, is this the rebirth of a nation? I won't say birth of a nation. That goes to Rizal's era. But is this the rebirth of a nation? Like the Philippines rediscovering itself, its place of pride, its sense of national resilience and strength. Miko, how do you see that? I mean, of course, you're also now in the Armed Forces of the Philippines. How do you see this soul-searching process as a Filipino and also member of the Armed Forces of the Philippines?
Yeah.
Tita,
Thank you,
pa-picture
sir,
ako.
for that question.
Pa-picture ako.
Again, if I may just note,
Then my phone ka
this
sarili
express
mo. I'm
of
using my phone.
and then not necessarily reflect the views of my organization. But going back to your question, sir, I completely agree with you and Justin. That we are indeed living in very interesting times. And the public bears data to support of this argument because there is public opinion polls that are strongly against China. Of course, there are opposition within the country, few of them, although with very deep pockets, maybe we could discuss that later. But yeah, I agree that there is this growing consciousness among our public that and our
From the other
people, and
side
you
to
can see
Tita,
that
from my
actually
back.
in the official
Mm.
publications of our government. During the Duterte administration, again, we could discuss this further later on. Although the president was saying one thing, his national security establishment was actually saying another thing. In the national security strategy and national security policy of the Duterte administration, it explicitly articulated how the security establishment viewed the country. This emphasis on this archipelagic and maritime configuration of our country and how it attracted major foreign powers. Uh, that kind of language was not actually seen in previous administrations. Because as you said, sir, ang focus talaga naman talaga nun ay yung internal security
Yeah,
natin.
Justin was
But
explaining it, not me. Yeah, yeah,
sorry,
Justin.
Justin,
Yeah.
mentioned it a while ago. Na yung focus talaga before was internal security, but now, even among the general public, talagang may clamor no, for us to beef up our defense capabilities as well as to strengthen the armed forces of the Philippines. No? At saka yung ano talaga it's very palpable sa mga, even the civil society movement, yung organization ni Justin,
Right.
even the late National Security Advisor, Roy Lugones, has his, and together with Secretary Alunan, has their own grouping. So it's really very palpable na yung, because of this external threat, this idea
Right.
of yung Filipino consciousness. And maybe another point to add here is that siguro lalo na doon sa generation natin, those of us here in this podcast.
Wait, just to be clear, we're all millennials here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just to be clear.
I think Justin is, if I'm not mistaken, the youngest.
Yeah. Gen Z ka, hindi ka naman Gen Z, Justin, no?
No, technically it's still millennial.
Okay, good.
Ako, I have to admit, I am the oldest generation Z.
Sige.
And that, maganda yung framing ko. No?
Sige.
Yeah, oldest generation Z. To be clear.
Kasi yung generation natin, we are, yun nga, going back to sa 2012, which I think is when most of us, not just tayong apat, but also the general public, talaga
Yeah.
consciousness about this South China Sea issue. Kasi before, episodic siya eh. Ngayon kasi
Right.
it's almost on a daily basis may nangyayari no, sa South China Sea. But since then, no, talagang our generation lives in a period wherein the international environment is undergoing through a transition.
Right.
The last time it went through such a transition was in the late 80s to the early 90s, yung end of the Cold War. Ito, yung from one order to the next,
Right.
that which is in itself unique kasi that transition was relatively peaceful. No? Kasi transitions in world orders are usually violent, as
Right.
in the book of Graham Addison proved. No? Yung Civilist Trump. But yung generation natin ngayon is it's unfolding in our very eyes. Yung different developments around the world, not to mention yung sa war in Ukraine and so on. But yun nga, we are, siguro, pinag-usapan namin pa ng mga classmates ko before. Parang ang sarap maging political science student now. Maybe compared maybe in the late 90s or the early 2000s. But ngayon, lalo na kung IR yung major mo,
Yeah.
ang daming case studies. No?
Right.
So forums like this could really help. But going back to your question, sir, yeah, I completely agree na talagang there is this growing consciousness, which I think, as Justin said, pattern talaga yun. I mean, with all due respect sa ating other ASEAN friends, yung Singapore was born out because of this Malaysian plan.
Yeah.
Diba? And yung other countries. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, it is true. I mean, how should I put it? I mean, the thing is, we are our age. I mean, we're all in our 30s or late 20s, maybe in the case of Justin. I don't know. This is also the era of rise of China, right? Before we were born, China was, sorry to say it, kind of a dirt poor giant North Korea. Our era, just as we grew up, China grew into this immensely powerful and now a very technologically sophisticated country, right? I remember 2015, we had an event in Tsinghua, and it's like everyone was using QR code. All these were using QR code. We were the only idiots with cash going to the shops, and they were looking at as if we were like, Homo erectus or something like that, right? Dinosaurs. And doon ko lang nakita, this is different. This China is going to be a force to reckon with. And now in Manila, you're going to see also a lot of Chinese cars, including EV cars by China. The BYDs I'm seeing are really, really nice, among others. So our era has also coincided with that. But unfortunately, we're on the front line of the not so good side of this new superpower, right? We are the frontline nation. Although I don't want to steal it away from Taiwan, the situation of Taiwan is much more stark than us, but we're kind of there, right? Josh, how do you see this in terms of a critical juncture? And do you also think that this is also potentially the birth of a whole epistemic community, of a whole series of strategic thinkers in the Philippines with a focus on West Philippines? I don't think we had that before, right? Purong counter-terrorism, yung mga ganyan yung mga experts dati.
Kung titignan mo kasi yung ating historiography, actually. Historiography, by the way, refers to the historical scholars, yung mga historians natin writing how we write our narratives, actually. Yung historiography natin has been focusing on the consolidation of nationhood.
Right.
And it stemmed back, actually, no 1900, no 18, late 1800s, no? And makikita natin na yung West Philippine Sea, syempre, we have just named it noong 2011 with the Republic Act, di ba? Pero,
Right.
ang ganda lang na isipin natin that itong dagat na to, matagal na nandyan yan. Di ba? If you know what I mean, no?
Right.
It's just that tayo kasi yung nagpuput ng meaning. No? The mere fact that we named this as West Philippine Sea connotes the idea that we are now putting meaning to places. These places would now have people, hence there would be spaces. And these spaces would have meaning for us. And itong meaning na to, nakikita ko actually na ito yung isang napakagandang episode sa ating historiographical development. No? Maraming mga pagkakataon na kung saan we have to revisit our pages of history,
Right.
kung paano magiging continuum itong kwento natin ngayon. Kasi kung titignan natin, as we can observe, yung panahon nila Aguinaldo with the First Philippine Republic, they also had a share of concerns with rising great power.
Right.
Diba? Ganon din ang panahon nila Manuel L. Quezon. No? Rising great power din. America was once rising power. Nagwo-worry, is this a friend or not?
Yeah.
Maybe. Oo. Ganon din yung Commonwealth government. Kasi kung titignan mo yung mga records, if you would read nung debates ng 1930s, yung sa legislation, Senator Claro M. Recto and yung kanyang contemporaries, si Senator Camilo Osias, nag-aaway sila actually what to do
Right.
with our strategic posture. Sabi ni Recto, itong Japanese Empire has to be dealt with a sound national defense posture. Pero para kay Camilo Osias, at binak ito at that time tumakbong presidenteng Emilio Aguinaldo na matanda na, sabi nilang dalawa, why don't we rely on the spirit of international justice? No? Ito yung tinatawag natin sa IR literature na idealism. No? So, umasa tayo, pero nabigo tayo, and alam na nga natin ang nangyari ng Second World War. No? So, in terms of IR, in thinking that, ang argument ko kasi, natuto na tayo in a way na great powers, may ambition sila, and they will go through great lengths to get what they want.
And brute force.
Sa akin,
Yeah.
I'm speaking from 2023 actually. So, noong 2010s, iba ang usapan kasi natin. We've tried the previous administration, no, na baka hindi, pero clearly merong ambition ito, and maapektuhan tayo. So, in other words, ang gusto ko sabihin dito, napaka-interesting para sa mga historians on how this will unfold. And it's up to us
Right.
kung paano tayo magre-respond. Kasi baka mamaya baka maulit lang yung nangyari last time. No, nagoyo tayo ng mga rising great powers.
Right. That's absolutely correct. I mean, Josh, in fact, one of the lectures I gave in PUP when I was a professor chair was the comparison between Aguinaldo, balancing between Spain and rising America or declining Spain. And then later on, of course, to the Commonwealth era, we're talking about Manuel Quezon trying to balance between Imperial Japan, rising Imperial Japan, and kind of America withdrawing. And then now what's happening. And my argument is how I wish our leaders now are a little bit less of Aguinaldo when it comes to geopolitics, a little bit more of Manuel Quezon, right? Speaking of which, maybe I can. This is the last part for this episode, just to get the ball rolling. How does Duterte go down in history? Because just to be clear about this, I think I made a lot of enemies early on during the Duterte era when I said, well, I mean, maybe him saying we shouldn't rely on the US and we should diversify relations isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just that, of course, later on how it was executed is another question. I felt he raised good strategic questions. In the same way, I also have a lot of disagreements with Trump, but I think Trump also raised some good questions about, hey, what is this networks of alliances we have? Is this serving our national interest? Is this really the way forward, right? So I have big questions with populism. I've written books about what's wrong with them. But I always agree, there's one thing that makes populists very popular, or at least makes them win, is they raise good questions. They frame the issues pretty effectively. Now, so definitely, as Justin said, we're not here to bash people, personally speaking, but Justin, siguro for the last part of this episode, because we're talking about the rebirth of a nation, what is the historical role? I mean, if you were a historian 50 years from now, how are you going to write about the role of Duterte? Because he was quite a shock to Philippine foreign policy, and whether it's a good shock or not, it's something we can debate. But how do you see that, Justin? Nakamute kaya ata, Justin.
Okay, sorry. I think this is quite a controversial opinion, but I would actually think that Duterte was a phase that the Philippines had to go through, right? Our foreign policy has never been so different under his administration compared to all other previous presidents, and I think it actually benefited the country to actually try out a foreign policy and still see that despite us trying to better relations with China, the threats posed by China remained the same or constant, such as yung maritime incursions nila, not just in the West Philippine Sea, but also in the Philippine Benham
Right.
Rice, in the northeast of the Philippines. And really, the bottom line is that happens because by virtue of China's size. No? So regardless of its intentions, the nature of its scale, sabi nga ni the late Professor Irene Baviera, it is going to be threatening to the Philippines regardless of its intentions, because it just has a huge military presence in the region. It's trying to push out into the Pacific Ocean, and by whether we like it or not, we have to respond to that. So I think the Duterte administration can be viewed in that sense na it was a phase we had to go through to realize that we actually needed to stick to the basics of our foreign policy. Kasi during the Aquino administration, some people were that was the question: why are we so reliant on the US? No, why are we undertaking lawfare under international law to bring China to court when it's at the end of the day it's guns versus pieces of paper, right? And Duterte asked those important questions, as you said, and fortunately for us, we did realize that there is wisdom in our alliance with the United States. No? Even if yes, things aren't going to go back to the same as before. The Philippines right now is trying to have a more equal partnership with the United States, even if we fall short in practice, no, to try to have some more self-respect for ourselves. And of course, I think the US right now is reciprocating that. So I think when we look back at the Duterte years, I think it's going to be a critical juncture wherein we tried something else, and and we realized that hindi tayo pwedeng mag-try ng bago just for the sake na magkaroon ng something new, right? To try something new for its own sake. We cannot have that. And ultimately, we're going to look back into this period as saying na we need to have a consistent and coherent foreign policy across administrations. We cannot have pendulum swings na yung from Aquino to Duterte radically different. And in a way, it's a lesson for future presidents as well to respect continuity in foreign policy, because foreign policy has to be grounded on territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and these things should be constant across administrations. So yes, they can tinker with policy, how they will want to relate to China and so forth. but they cannot do it in a way that undermines the core military and defense interests of the Philippines. And I think that's a lesson learned from.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe I'll go Josh first because Miko is because he's still in the government. Just ano yan, love is sweeter at the second time. It was that what Duterte was all about to make us realize the value of our alliances. What's going on there?
If you look at the story kasi ng Philippine strategic development natin, you have to look at why did Duterte do that, no? Aquino, Duterte, and then what we have right now. Ang argument ko kasi dyan, when I wrote a book chapter on this one, is that ang ginagawa ni Duterte is by and large a consequence or so-called strategic effect na ginawa ni President Aquino at that time, no? So I argued that there are 4 ways na ginawa si President Aquino III in order to act on China's rise, military modernization, strategic partnerships with Australia and Japan, and then the lawfare with the arbitration ruling, and then itong alliance with the EDCA. All of these things, papasok ka doon sa isang strategic effect. Ito yung ina-act on na trabaho ni President Duterte. Now, nandito tayo sa post-Duterte. Basically, ang lumalabas ngayon is that whatever Marcos does is by and large a consequence kung ano man ang mga naging maganda at hindi magandang kwento na nakita natin during Duterte's time. And indeed, I would second what Justin mentioned na we had to go through that phase. Just to point out the fact that we tried. Okay, perhaps Aquino III was wrong. Let's try the other side. Pero hindi nga nag-work. This, if anything, is the current, itong current na phase natin is a trying moment for us. Okay, kung ayaw natin ng too much of this, too much of that, perhaps let's try this one. And yun nga yung sinasabi ko na argument ko for many times sa iba't ibang pieces ko na perhaps let's forget Duterte from now on. Let's focus on what Marcos Jr.'s government in terms of foreign policy, paano niya i-continue lawfare, and also yung pag-put forward ng defense posture natin. Doon na tayo. Kasi ano man ang gagawin niya will generate a strategic effect towards the next president. At ano man ang mga gagawin niya will just produce another strategic effect. And it's an interesting thing for scholars, especially historians, to talk about regarding the unfolding of our Philippine history. Kasi kung titingnan natin, napakabata pa natin. Sa totoo lang. Laging sinasabi yan ng isang professor na talagang back in UP sinasabi niya, bakit mo kinukumpara itong Pilipinas sa ibang bansa? Maraming pang kakaining bigas.
But
literally.
wait, Josh, Singapore is younger than us. United Arab Emirates is younger than us. I don't know, Qatar. When was Qatar 50 years ago?
Of course, no.
I get your point, but let's not give ourselves too much excuse.
It just so happened that we went through a lot in these things. Now, so ako naman cautiously optimistic ako on how we can unfold these things. Kasi perhaps siguro mas magandang i-judge na lang natin to. Siguro at the end of this century, kasalanan na ng generation and generation and generation to. Perhaps may kinalaman tayo doon. Kung ano man ang gagawin natin, we can do podcast, pero kung wala nang impact, kawawa yung next generation. So it's a big and a heavy commitment itong ginagawa natin actually.
Well, by the end of the century, probably an AI version of us is gonna pull this off. So let's just make as many versions of ourselves online so that ma-AI tayo by 2099 or 199. Thanks for that. Miko, I wanna, just to play the devil's advocate here, or rather angel's advocate, I don't know, whatever. My sense is, I see the attraction of a teleological, almost a Catholic argument now. We had to be punished so that we realize, this and that. But ang point ko is, I have 2 things with that. First is the argument of path dependency. Many of the things that Marcos Jr. is doing right now is because he just has to correct the mess that was created under the previous administration. So that's one argument I have against a more teleological way of putting it. The second one, Parang tumakas yata si Miko. Ano? The second one, wait lang, di pa ako tapos, Miko. Wag kang tumakas. First is, I have an issue with teleological argument, with all due respect to that point. Because in fairness, Justin, you're not the first to make it. But you know, and then mahirap to make that argument on EJK, right? I don't think we had to have 20,000 people killed potentially for us to learn the value of human rights. It's easy to say that if not, you're not part of the victims, right? But the second one is, and this I believe is more controversial because I think Justin, your point is more. It's more of it consoles the argument that it's unfortunate but we're gonna learn from it. Medyo may pagka Coach Chot Reyes learning experience. Magbuwan na tayo mga gold. No, my second argument is I think Duterte had good strategy pero yung implementation went wrong somewhere because he just didn't have what it took. So parang he had a good idea of the big picture. Parang he's a good architect but horrible engineer. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, nung sinabi sa kanya, anong itsura ng bahay na gusto mo, medyo matino yung ginawa niya, di ba? And then, nung i-execute na, yung mga chipang na ginamit ng mga steel, chipang na paint, chipang na yung mga hinari niya, mga problematic people, and then in the middle, he's cutting deals. So, for me, I think it's like a good script, potentially, that went really wrong. So, I think that's my reading, which I think is not something much discussed. So, I'm very Hegelian, negation of negation. I don't buy any side of the argument. My argument is that there was something inherently good about it, but it just went wrong because Duterte just didn't have what it took. He didn't have the sophistication. And then second, ang sabog. And and let's be honest, he's the first guy to deal with China the way he did. So medyo uncharted territories din yan. So you get what I'm saying? It's a very nuanced take. It's totally different from the usual takes on Duterte. Ikaw, Miko, what do you think about that without jeopardizing your career? Tumatakas ka na, yung first question ko palang nag-off. Alam mo yung mga in-interview, tapos, hello, I cannot hear you. Kasi ayaw sagutin yung mga analysts sa Moscow. Like, what do you think about Putin's gonna, hello, I cannot hear you. Hello. Alam mo, muntik ka na kaya, Miko, Go ahead, bro.
Alam mo, Richard, meron akong
Sige, Josh, and then...
Minention mo na terrible architect siya. Ang tanong kasi, bakit kasi tawag natin chief architect?
Good architect, terrible engineer. Parang hindi siya magaling na civil engineer. Like, yung execution ay sobrang pangit kasi chipang yung ginamit. Pero ang ganda nung architecture. Diversified relations, independent foreign policy, I like that. I had nothing against it because it gives us more room for maneuver. In fact, if you hear Lee Kuan Yew and then you hear Duterte, I mean, the more coherent version, they were not too different. Except Lee Kuan Yew was both a good architect and a good engineer. Digong at best was a good architect, meaning big questions. But ang pangit sablay nung execution. I'm just saying, and many factors came in because Obama criticized him on human rights, Duterte, China helped him. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I don't see it in teleological terms. I just see it as a script that went off, sobrang off script, na sobrang wrong. And that's why I rather not look at it teleologically. All the teleology helps me to psychologically appreciate it. That's where I see the value of what Justin was saying. Go ahead. Miko, yeah.
Siguro, with respect to Duterte, President Duterte himself, the jury is still out, I think. Before we could fully appreciate, for lack of a better term, what he did during his 6 years in office. I mean, the likes of President Truman, President Carter in the US, it took a number of decades before the public realized that the decisions that they made in office were right. So again, with respect to Duterte, I think the jury is still out. But if I may focus on the Duterte administration as a whole, siguro I'll jump off mula dun sa sinabi ni Josh. No? Yung kasi those of us who studied and teach Philippine foreign relations, Philippine foreign policy, we always, at some point in our lecture, nabanggit natin yun na the president is the chief architect of foreign policy. Now, going back to your question, Prof. Richard, of how Duterte, or in this case, the Duterte administration as a whole, will be viewed, allow me to wear my IR academic hat. Siguro what the
please,
Duterte
keep that hat
administration
on.
showed us is, yes, in theory, the president is the chief architect of the foreign policy, but in reality, what the Duterte administration showed us is the role of the different institutions within and outside government in shaping foreign policy. No, I think President Duterte came into office with a, as you said, he may have been a good architect. He has his design, no, from the get-go. His speech in China, when he said he's aligning the Philippines with the ideological flow of China and Russia. Essentially, he did things that to many of us were inconceivable, like ending Balikatan, abrogating the VFA. And there were even talks of pulling out of EDCA at some point during his administration. But what prevented all of those from actually coming into fruition was the role of the different agencies.
Yun.
Dito ngayon papasok yung bureaucratic politics approach ni Graham Allison in foreign policy. So I think the Duterte administration is a case study of that. Not just institutions, of course, the armed forces. I'll not go into details, but definitely the armed forces had a role in persuading the administration from keeping the pillars of the Philippines-US alliance intact. And of course, yung role din ng media, no? The media and the think tanks as well. Let's not underestimate din yung role ng think tanks when it comes to shaping the debate when it comes to our foreign relations. Yun nga, I think I forgot to mention this a while ago, but I think si Prof. Richard Ata, yung the rise of epistemic communities, napaka-importante nun. Looking back now,
Right.
Duterte has been out of office a little more than a year, June 2022 when he stepped down. So ngayon, nakikita natin yun ngayon. So I think while Duterte, the man, the former president, his thinking will be studied by historians for many years to come. At least now, as one who specializes in IR, like all of us here, I think yun yung one of the things na dun siya matatandaan, at least yung administration niya, yung the role of the different institutions when it comes to foreign relations. Kasi it was yung previous administrations naman, kumbaga, there's consistency in many ways yung pro-US. I mean, we've seen that from President Quezon onwards. There nga, yung kay Duterte administration nga he attacked the very pillars of our alliance with the US. And as I said, what kept it intact was the different institutions. Yung the military, the national security establishment, and let's not also underestimate yung role of the legislature.
Yeah.
I remember that when Duterte had a spat with then Ambassador Philip Goldberg,
Right.
because of the human rights issues and so on, he was not actually if I'm not mistaken.
Binigyan siya ng
not
award
given-
ng Philippine Congress, a slap on the face
it's
of the
Congress,
president.
not
I
the
remember that,
president.
yeah.
Kasi ideally, it's the president who
Right.
But the Senate stepped in, then to award the then Ambassador Goldberg all of the courtesy and so on before he left. So yun nga, may role din yung Congress doon, and of course yung role of the national security establishment and the media and the think tank.
Yeah.
So yun nga, Duterte administration, at least wearing my IR hat here, would at the very least be remembered, at saka na-highlight yung role ng different institutions, which is very good, no? Kasi yung we're not a monolith. Hindi monolith yung ating foreign policy establishment. Na-highlight ng Duterte administration yon, yung role ng different institutions, keeping, for lack of a better term, yung checks and balances when it comes to foreign policy. Kasi we taught our students na yun nga, very legalistic yung approach. No? Chief architect of foreign policy, he has control, he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. In theory, yes. Oo. But in practice, we saw how the interplay of the different organizations within and outside government in shaping Philippine foreign policy, no? Which by the end, he abrogated his he abrogated his decision to end the VFA, binalik si Balikatan at towards the end of his administration. No? So nakita natin yung interplay of the different
It was
forces
a contested
shaping
foreign policy, right, Miko? I mean, I put
Yeah.
it that way. I put it as a contested foreign policy, a clear case of the man, the moment, and the steady state, right? Like definitely all of those elements were there. Again, for those who covered Trump administration or even Modi in India or Bolsonaro, they have their version of this, even in Turkey, for instance, under Erdogan. So this is quite endemic in populist captured democracies, right? Ibang usapan na si Putin. I mean, good luck opposing the guy and staying alive and not falling off the third floor or 10th floor, right? I really appreciate that. This is really good. So I think we can end this episode on this. Mukhang madaldal tayong lahat. Nahirapan tayo sa 20 minutes pala. But I think this sets a tone because what we're saying here is that the West Philippine Sea, as important as it has triggered something bigger, which is the rediscovery of what it means to be a Filipino. It's kind of a birth of a nation on multiple levels, including birth of a steady state. We saw who are the real patriots. We saw who are not the real patriots, or who are pretending to be patriots. Nabuking na eh. Nalaman natin eh. Who are the ones who are really trapos and who are medyo trapo pero actually may patriotism din at lumalaban. So, I think very revealing yung 6 years of Duterte. But the most important thing, I think, especially Miko was emphasizing that, and I think Justin and Joshua can agree also, having worked in the government, is that you have to separate Duterte from the Duterte administration. The two are not necessarily the same. And I think one of the most fascinating aspects of the Duterte era, which you don't see in Trump or Erdogan or any populist I've studied, is this. He kept Lorenzana in position of power for quite some time. And he appointed very independent-minded people like Teddy Boy, muntik sabi ko, Tito Boy, Teddy Boy Locsin Jr., right? Who on many occasions were saying the complete opposite of Duterte. And not only got away with it, they kind of even were allowed to play their heroics games, no? So this, I think, makes Duterte very exceptional populist. Because in all other cases I studied, you go against the man, you're fired. Mattis had to go in the US. Erdogan fired so many central bankers and finance ministers who didn't go his way. Bolsonaro, I don't know how many people he fired throughout his short 4 years in office. That, I think, makes Duterte quite a unique case. No, that makes him interesting in historical comparative terms. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for that fascinating first episode. Let's just call it Rebirth of a Nation, the West Philippine Sea. Salamat. And next episode, let's discuss other important issues, including the Marcos Jr. administration. The bad, the good, the very, very good. Kasi nasa government yung iba, hindi ko magawa yung bad, good. Ano yun? The good, the bad, and ugly. Sige, ako na lang bahala dun sa iba. Thank you very much on that, gentlemen. Alright, okay. Let's go for the next episode now. Alright, we're live for another episode dito sa Pod para sa Bayan. Alright, kind of version ng Pod Save America natin. I was thinking something along those lines. Okay, so before we go to our topic today, we want to talk more about the Marcos Jr. administration, its predicament, and we can also discuss the good, not so good, or what could get ugly in terms of foreign policy direction of the Philippines. Not necessarily because of the president, but because of the predicaments we're facing. I mean, speaking of Duterte, I mean, when we discussed Duterte in our previous episode, it kind of reminded me of this. Remember the movie Charlie Wilson? Towards the end, he's talking to Kaufman Bayan, and he talks about the tale of the Zen master, right? The story of a Zen master who kind of, essentially, to make the story short, you never know, right? What you think is good today is actually bad for you tomorrow, and what you think is bad today could be something good for tomorrow. Parang just wait, right? So perhaps it will take some time before we really appreciate the full impact of the Duterte legacy. Not only in terms of our foreign policy, I was just interviewing also Senator De Lima, and we were talking about the impact on the Philippine judicial institutions. But I appreciate at least giving a more nuanced view. Because there are two opposing views. Duterte, best president in the solar system, and then Duterte, the most horrible president, China boy. And I think both of those extreme views kind of miss the point. So what we introduced was the 50 shades of nuance to the Philippine foreign policy. Now, let's talk about his successor and try to put him into historical context. When you talk about Marcos Jr., were you guys surprised by the turn of events? Because I think my other co-podcaster, my co-host, Lisandro Claudio, is a historian. He put it quite interesting. He said, if we look at Marcos Jr., he's a very traditional post-Marcos Filipino president, right? That's the biggest irony. Marcos Jr. is a very traditional post-Marcos president, right? His foreign policy, I jokingly said, is 80% Pinoy, 20% Digong. Now I would say it's 100% Pinoy or maybe even more, and almost 0% Pinoy, Digong, right? Let's talk about this. Oh, let's start with you, Mikos, since maybe you want to say shorter on this. Kasi employer mo na, I'm kidding. No, no, Miko. To the degree that you can say what you can say, like, what is your read of Mark? Is he your traditional post-Marcos president? I mean, like, how do we put him? Because he seems very standard and conventional, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think I kind of missed standard and boring and conventional. Too much action for 6 years.
Yeah. Siguro, I think there was this sense during the election period last year that he would largely continue what Duterte said. That was the conventional wisdom at the time. Maybe candidate Marcos is different from President Marcos. When he came into office, frankly, the return to a more conventional president who sticks to the script is in some ways refreshing because siguro, I mean, those of us who work in government, presidential speeches undergo through a certain process. At times vetted by different offices as well. Those which are part of the national security establishment. Those are vetted
Right.
speeches. And to see a president, do not go on rambling for hours is in many ways refreshing. But going back to your question, sir, is he your conventional post-war or post-EDSA president? Yes, he is, in many ways, yeah. The planks of his foreign policy are not that different from previous administrations, maybe with the exception of Duterte himself. But yes, he is conventional in that way.
Josh, you want to comment that? I mean, you're in a progressive university. I'm sure marami mga never Marcos, never again people. But if you look at his foreign policy, it's not the scariest thing in the world, right? It's pretty conventional, pretty okay, I would say. I won't give it 10 out of 10, but pasado so far. So far, of course. We'll discuss the potential ugly later on. But so far, pasado, right? I mean, I don't want to put you in trouble with your employers on the other side.
Ang sabi nga ng co-faculty ko, actually, sabi niya, si Marcos...
Wala, laglagan na ba to?
Si Marcos mas dilawan pa sa dilaw in terms of foreign policy. And we were all quite surprised. Pero,
Correct.
sige, huwag muna natin pag-usapan yung progressive university.
Yeah, okay.
Ako lang muna. I have to be honest. Isa ako sa mga nabiktima ng... Kasi kung, di ba, last time, no, si Duterte, jet ski pa more than...
Yeah.
Hindi niya pala ipapromise. During the electoral campaign, it was saying a different song, singing a different song. Now, we're all pleasantly surprised. No? So, ang haka ko kasi dito is that perhaps I have to stick it pabalik doon sa idea na ito na ba yung papunta tayo sa nagre-rebrand ang Marcos? Diba? So are we trying to suggest the idea na kung Machiavellian ka, okay, i-rebrand mo yung family name mo towards something that is good, perhaps pagbigyan kita. Okay, so parang ganun yung transformation na nangyayari, no?
So you're saying this is instrumentalist?
Alam mo yung parang nabangga ka sa isang concrete structure at nanginginig ka pa rin. Ganun pa rin yung psyche ng aking reading dito sa paligid. So I'm really surprised.
Interesting.
Ngayon, sa akin kasi, less relevant na yung na-surprise ako. Sa akin, okay, he's on the right path, but is he doing the right things? I am gonna say it all over again if I have to. Is on the right track, but my question is he doing the right things? And so much has happened this 2023, di ba? Na kailangan nating i-evaluate, no? So in other words, yeah, we were all pleasantly surprised, pero not necessarily cheerleaders tayo.
Yeah, don't be over impressed. Speaking of that, Justin, let's talk to you. I mean, obviously, again, in the previous episode, we said you have to separate Duterte from the Duterte administration, and in many ways, his foreign policy was contested. And then we talked about key figures like Lorenzana. We talked about Teddy Boy, Teddy Boy Locsin Jr. Right? Here you have Gibo Chodoro, right? Pretty solid guy, probably one of the smartest guys ever to enter government at that level. You have a very veteran diplomat, and practically all of the USEX undersecretaries are career diplomats. No mumbo jumbo political career appointee kind of people, right? So what about that? I mean, I see what Josh is saying. Josh is saying, well, we're not sure about Marcos Jr. Maybe there is like double game. This is rebranding, rehabilitation, Pacquiao with the West, make himself look like the man of the West Philippine Sea. But it matters who you put in charge of the wheel, right? And he put pretty decent people. I mean, you know some of these people. You have met these people over the recent months. Tell me a little bit about that. What is your sense of his cabinet? The king and his men, the men's king rather, yeah.
Actually, the cabinet of this administration, right? If you remove the name Marcos from the name of the administration, you'd actually think it's an Aquino cabinet or it's an Arroyo cabinet, in the sense that because frankly, all of these presidents, three presidents, Arroyo, Aquino, and Marcos, who are all children of former presidents, it's a social class thing, right? They all have the same upbringing, they all have the same socioeconomic status, and naturally their circles all intertwine with each other. So alta de ciudad, talagang this is really the upper class of Philippine society. Now, they may disagree on substance of foreign policy at times, but the way they govern is pretty much going to be the same. So in the Marcos administration, we're seeing a return on, for example, a return on data-driven decision-making, which is, some people have compared the opposite of what Duterte was doing kasi may decision agad, so forth. And, some people have criticized Marcos for that as well, which was the criticism kay Aquino, yung paralysis by analysis as well. So it's really, for me, it's a social class thing, right? It's really a product of his upbringing. But at the personal level, I think yung cabinet selection niya, I'd have to actually give it to the president, because this is the president that had a lot of beef to take on with the US. No? Talagang they were exiled to Hawaii. And, historically, they were duped into going to Hawaii, right? Instead of going to Ilocos, they were taken to Hawaii.
Wait, Justin, sorry. Come on. I mean, kawawa naman sila in Hawaii, posh place. What a hard place to be in.
Let me clarify. No. It's really more like he could have used that historical background
I
to
know.
really go full on China, scrap the United States. In fact, no, yung beef ni Marcos had more of a story to it than yung beef ni Duterte against the US. No?
I agree.
Story about yung naharas siya or whatever and so forth. Yung kay Duterte, for me, I think it's really, to some extent, it's an unwarranted anger against the US.
Marites
Yung kay
lang.
Marcos, I think, yung kay Marcos, I think he was professional enough to craft a foreign policy guided on solid foreign policy principles rather than yung what he feels about it. So I think the cabinet appointments are fine. I just like to end by pointing this out, no. The original sin of where we are right now is Duterte sometime in 2016 appointed si Ambassador Romualdez as special envoy to the US, and 2017 he was made full ambassador. And that was the start of, I think, Duterte's biggest mistake. If you notice, our ambassadors to China since 2016, they are all career people. They are all professional people at the least, right? So, si Ambassador Chito Santa Romana, and then the current ambassador right now, who was a professional journalist based in China before. All of them don't have the political gravitas that Ambassador Romualdez had with the US. So the Philippines started off by appointing a political heavyweight to the US and a regular emissary to China. And I think hindi nila na-expect the ability of the Romualdezes na bilang kamag-anak ng mga Marcos to shape the foreign policy of this administration. So, that appointment for me was very crucial. So si Ambassador Romualdez in the US has been ambassador since 2017 to the US, two administrations now, right? So I think the selection of the people was very important. More than more than saying that we were pleasantly surprised by the policy of the administration. I think you would actually say that China had it coming by just looking at the gravitas of the people we were appointing to the US versus to China.
Right.
So, yung mga people we're appointing to China, they never shaped our China policy to begin with. But with the appointment of Romualdez to the US, we had that opportunity wherein our ambassador can really have substantial inputs to policy and has the president's ear. So that was the crucial difference.
Pero
Yes.
sir, if I may just add yung...
Go ahead, please, Miko. Yeah,
yung-
please, please.
Justin yung also the appointment of Lorenzana in 2016 as Secretary of National Defense was also very crucial. Here's a guy who knows Washington very well. He was there as our Defense and Armed Forces Attaché, and then later on to head the Veterans Affairs. So we had as our top defense official a man who knows the U.S. very well, who has gravitas, that the U.S. defense establishment can work with. And as was mentioned in the previous episode, he went against the president publicly in a number of occasions. And that's also very crucial. That's a point that I raised previously in the last episode. In the role of institutions in
The steady state.
shaping our foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, just to put things in context, I mean, by the way, folks are free to check my interviews with both Secretary Lorenzana multiple times, also with Ambassador Romualdez multiple times, just to hear their side of the story. I can post a link for those who are interested, because we want to be fair. I mean, they have their own side of the story. In fact, one of the interesting thing I heard from Ambassador Romualdez was he kind of said something like, Duterte was the shock that made it good for Marcos to come in, something along those lines. No, so it's even more positive spin, if I could put it, or positive version of what Justin was arguing in the or suggesting in the previous episode. Of course, we're here just wearing different hats and trying to see different sides of the argument. Hindi naman kami invested in just one argument. We're invested in the West Philippine Sea and protection of our country. Yes, interesting. So I think we kind of have a general understanding of what's going on here. We may agree to disagree na lang whether we believe this is about Marcos or this is about the Marcos administration and the good choices he has made. But ako, just, with what Josh was saying, even if this has to do something with Marcos Jr. rebranding project, if the effect is the right people are running the show, if the effect is better policy in the West Philippine Sea, I mean, it's not the most ideal situation, but I'm willing to take that over what happened in the past when perhaps the intention of Duterte was good, but because he hired the wrong engineers to do his architecture, then things really went wrong. Do you get what I'm saying? So intentions are important on a moral level, but in geopolitics, effects are even more important, in my opinion, because this is a matter of war and peace and national interest. Speaking of matter of war and peace, let's discuss this in the episode. What are the things that are making you happy when it comes to West Philippine Sea, and what are the things that are okay? Hindi pa naman tayo presidente, keeping you up at 3 a.m. I mean, I'm awake at 3 a.m. anyway. But what are the things that you're worried when it comes to the West Philippine Sea? Let's start with Josh.
Worry, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to talk about it. As Miko said, this is a good time to be a geopolitical analyst. It's more cool to be a political scientist than economist, finally. But things can get ugly. I mean, we saw Russia invading Ukraine last year. Who would have thought that, right? We saw what happened in the Middle East most recently. A really horrific situation. So we still live in the era of war and peace. This is very much Tolstoy's era, if I can put it that way. Yes, Josh.
Ang pinaka problema ko kasi dito is when our signaling goes bad. When I say signaling goes bad, kasi kung titignan natin yung almost at the end of the Duterte administration, we restored the Balikatan exercises, big as there was during the Duterte administration. Now, kino-continue ni Marcos Jr. We're trying to do all of these diplomatic overtures with our allies, with our partners. No? Pero ang problema kasi sa akin dito is that when you do signaling, you have to make sure that it's gonna be sustainable and also it's gonna be credible. You have to communicate it na makikita nila na talagang you really can do it. So what would worry me actually is not actually na magkaroon ng gera. Ang worry ko is that we don't win what we are trying to signal all along. Right? So perhaps
You
I'll
mean
stop there.
mis-signaling? You mean mis-signaling?
No, no, no. Ang ibig sabihin ko
What?
dito,
Mm.
ang sinasabi ko dito, hindi natin na panindigan yung sinisignal natin. So again, what I'm worried is not about magkaroon ng gera, but actually, yung matalo tayo doon sa gera. Kasi sinisignal na natin that we're willing and we're determined to win, tapos hindi natin nagawa.
So
That's what
panindigan natin to. I mean, you're essentially saying what Lee Sheng-lu was saying, right? The Singaporean Prime Minister, in the New Economy Bloomberg Forum, he said, kayo sa Pilipinas, are you sure? You want to risk conflict or something like that. I see where you're coming from. Miko, what is your say on that? Do you think that we're just being gaslighted here? Is this a form of China and its friends in the region gaslighting the Philippines for doing what's 101, right? I mean, I completely agree with Josh. Like, panindigan natin yan. But do you feel also perhaps we have to make sure na hindi tayo nagpapapag-gaslight na, wait, tayo pang provocateur? Robin Hood. I mean, like, what's going on here, Miko?
I I don't buy yung tayo or gas yung argument na it's our fault. No? Maybe those are the arguments of others, but to say that it is our fault, no? Is simply detached from reality. Going back to your question, sir, I think what worries me would be two things. One, of course, yung possibility of miscalculation in
Right.
the South China Sea. In a small incident could prompt the bigger clash. Second would be, Justice Carpio has made this point very strongly and others. Yung what happens in Malampaya. If it runs out, the projection is within the administration of President Marcos. If that runs out, this whole South China Sea will be even closer to home, if I may
Yeah.
use that phrase. Yung pag nag-run out na yung sa Malampaya, that will really bring this South China Sea issue closer to home. And who knows what could happen.
Right.
And then another thing is, and I think this is related to what Joshua was saying, yung now there is this effort by our government to, I forget the exact term, yung strategic transparency ata yung term.
Yung sa
Assertive
PCG.
transparency.
Sa PCG, no?
Yeah.
Assertive transparency.
Yeah, proactive or assertive
Assertive.
transparent. Proactive,
Yeah.
I think proactive is better actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's that initiative which for us analysts, it's very important, and the general public then as well, that they are very
Right.
much aware of what is happening in the South. This is the right word, no? But for lack of better term, yung mano-normalize siya. Oh, well, it's happening anyway. What's new? See what I mean? Yung
Yeah.
parang...
You mean
nano-normalize,
trivialize?
parang-
Ma-trivialize?
Yeah.
Trivialize.
Yeah. Parang ano siya ang danger doon is that it will, some people might lose interest kasi nangyayari na siya.
So fatigue, attention fatigue,
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Di ba? Parang yun naman yung danger din doon na pagka lalo na ngayon, halos every week may nangyayari eh.
Yeah.
May incident na nangyayari sa South China Sea. So yun naman yung
Or wait lang, maybe Miko, every week na expose yung nangyayari because that's precise the
Yes,
point
yes.
behind proactive transparency, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So yun, since it's occurring on a fairly regular basis now, in the long run, kung ganun pa rin yung trend, yun nga, magkakaroon niya si sensor yung funding. So maybe yung three things na yun. Yung one is yung possibility of miscalculation. The second is yung implications of what happens sa Malampaya, which as mentioned by Justice Carpio and others will happen within President Marcos Jr.'s term. And yun nga, yung third would be the fatigue when it comes to transparency. So yun lang.
I like it. So, panindigan natin, if you're really into it, and at the same time, let's make sure na hindi maumay ang tao. I think that's one way of putting it. And hindi maging, matrivialize yung situation there. There is the risk of war and peace every single week, and that's why we're making these episodes, right? Kaya nga, we're here to make sure hindi matrivialize to. Ikaw, Justin, what keeps you awake at 3 a.m.? I mean, or whatever time zone we are, right? Yeah.
Okay, so diba, we've mentioned the worries. So I'll try to be a bit more positive about the administration. So I'll mention two things that I like, and then one thing
Right.
that I think they could do better on, right?
Right.
It's a bit more positive because I think we are fundamentally headed in the right direction. Marcos has a very balanced foreign policy. It's a question of are we executing it um, good, right?
Yeah.
Yun yung difference niya kay Duterte kasi yung kay Duterte, the direction itself is in question, right? So
Right.
we don't just have a problem with the execution, we have a problem with the strategy itself under Duterte. This administration, more balanced. So first thing that I like, operational response, no? I do agree. Talagang strategic gaslighting yung ginagawa ng China sa Philippines, right? Because if you look at it, there's nothing controversial about what the Marcos administration is doing, right? So I think people have to calm down and look at things in perspective. The EDCA sites, for example, that's an agreement we signed in 2014. The Philippines implementing that agreement right now is not a disruption of status quo. We are merely implementing something we had already planned to begin with, right? But right now it's being portrayed as something provocative by China. But you know, it's been in the pipeline for so long. It was actually Duterte that stopped the implementation of the EDCA sites, right? So actually, it was Duterte that disrupted the defense planning process of the Philippines, which may special place in the United States to help bolster our credible deterrence posture, right? Yung another thing, for example, yung resupply missions ng BRP Sierra Madre, why is that being portrayed or yung joint patrols natin with the United States, which we have been doing since the 1990s, by the way, folks? There is nothing, actually, ito, at the risk of being inflammatory, Marcos is not doing anything new in defense policy and defense posture. Nothing new.
Right.
And dun siya natitira ngayon because he is not refuting the argument that what he's doing is actually boring, routine stuff, right? He is actually playing into China's argument that what he is doing is disruptive of status quo, which it's not. So I think we have to put that into perspective. Yung resupply mission, that's a legal right of the Philippines. We're just exercising what we have been doing historically. Nothing controversial about it. Second thing I think that I like, yung strategic coherence niya. I think Marcos has placed the Philippines in a good position of what I call flexible enmeshment with respect to the US.
Right.
Nung kay Aquino kasi, when we filed the arbitral case, talagang it was really the low point of diplomatic relations with China. Hindi siya kinakausap ng China, hindi niya kinakausap yung China as well, right?
Right.
Marcos is a bit different. With everything that has happened in the West Philippines Sea right now, you know, parang every day there's a doom and gloom scenario. And still, Marcos is able to secure a meeting with President Xi Jinping. They still talk, right?
Right.
So it's not as yung argument actually that the Philippine-China relations right now are in such a bad state is actually, you know, it's not a fair reading of the situation. And I think that impression has to be corrected. No? The relations could have been worse. So it could, I think yung nangyayari ngayon kasi is we're cooperating with the US, but the cooperation is limited for the specific purposes of Philippine national interest, no? So we're not giving them access to Subic Bay, for example. We're just giving them access to a few EDCA sites necessary for credible deterrence posture. We're not inviting them en masse to return the US 7th Fleet here, for example. So nothing of that sort. So it's actually still balanced. Final point, I think what Marcos could be doing better is in terms of how it tries to articulate Philippine interest in the policy. And dito siya natitira kasi,
Right.
for example, during the last Shangri-La dialogue, the then Chief of Staff, General Centino, said, he was asked, why are we doing EDCA? And he said, well, we're fulfilling a commitment to an ally. Which for me, I think, lipas na yung ganong argument. We need to articulate very clearly what is the transactional benefit of the Philippines in doing this.
Right.
Because if you are very clear about what benefit you want, then you're also very clear about the level of cooperation with the US that you won't go to, right? Yung hindi ka nagiging puppet of the United States. So that's another thing that they have to more clearly articulate on. We need to articulate what's the Philippine interest in all of this. And I think Marcos should work on this very closely because si Duterte sold his own foreign policy. Si Marcos is speaking through the Chief of Staff, speaking to Secretary Gibo, but he's not strongly advocating for his own foreign policy, right? Which is really a shame, right? He should be his own foreign policy articulator and he should not delegate it to others. So he should be his own marketing agent, no? It cannot be delegated to other people kasi right now people are questioning the very premise of his foreign policy. And it needs to come from him directly and with decisiveness that the foreign policy is balanced to begin with. So let's stop debating, things like whether we should have resupply missions in the BRP Sierra Madre. This is a very commonsensical thing, isn't it? So para maiwasan na yung the fake news and all these political influence operations, he needs to put his foot down and be assertive about his own foreign policy.
Right. Just I think that perfectly sets the tone for the next episode. We're gonna talk about all of this yeah, bakery forums. This is our online version. We're gonna do our own I almost said it. We're okay. We're gonna delete this part. Rewind. Okay.
Monay forum
That's
yan.
it. Shots fired. Okay. Okay. No. I mean, for me, I think the president already has his take on this, even though wala na si Paul Soriano. Love the Philippines. Yan ang kanyang. Kasi my joke is, yung friends to all, enemy to none, pang tourism yan. Yung love the Philippines, yun yata yung kanyang foreign policy talagang strategy. But kidding aside, yung mga natin, kaibigan natin dyan sa QC, wag kayo magalit sa akin. I think this perfectly set us up for the next episode when we're gonna talk about strategic gaslighting. I like that. I mean, we're millennials anyway. Let's talk about this. And let's talk about grand strategy for the Philippines. Are we a middle power? I want to talk about it because one of the problems I have, and I really hated, with the strategic gaslighter people is that they have zero respect for the Philippines. They treat us as if we're just a pawn and we're just being manipulated by the other side because they want their side to manipulate the Philippines, and that pisses me off. Let's push back against that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that.
Thanks for having us.
I'm sorry na, ano ko na.
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right, this is it. Okay, I think medyo na Freudian slip tayo kanina. Woo! Let's do this. Okay, so we talked a lot about strategic gaslighting a while ago, and I want to talk about the Philippines as a kind of a new emergent middle power. And I think before we can go there, let's talk about this, gentlemen. What do you think about all of this experts popping out of nowhere? BRICS expert, I don't know, Global South expert. Like they're giving a bad name to BRICS. I mean, they're pretty good BRICS stuff I know
Ano ba
from.
yan?
Yeah. So, what's going on there? I mean, what's your take on this? Should we just tolerate them? More fun in the Philippines, or maybe this is something serious. This is a sharp power influence operation thing that we have to push back, or maybe it's a case to case basis. Some are just what the Soviets called useful idiots. I think that was the term during Cold War. Some are just useful idiots. They do it for free. Like it has nothing to do with espionage or anything like that. What's going on here? Josh, I'll start with you kasi nasa kabila ka. Just kidding. No, I'm kidding, Josh. Go ahead. Again, just to be clear, ladies and gentlemen, everything we say here is just purely reflective of our own personal opinion. Has nothing to do with the institution we represent. Now, if proud sila sa atin, good for them. But otherwise, please, don't be worried, okay? Go ahead, Josh.
Well, when you talk about kasi itong idea kasi nakakapagod na kasi, di ba? And I mean, alam na natin to that we're just in a place na kung saan dito tayo sa choosing between US and China, no? To the point na perhaps pumunta na tayo sa kabila. Ganun lang gusto ko sabihin ng mga best friends natin, di ba? So, it's an interesting to put it this way. Hayaan natin sila. No? Hayaan natin sila kasi if we have a better argument, I think mag-flourish yung argument natin. No?
So marketplace of ideas.
You want to shut them down, perhaps there's something, there's something fishy with you. Ako kasi nandun medyo
Josh,
lazy fair ako.
You're making a very liberal
No?
marketplace of idea argument. You're disappointing me.
I'd stick to that.
You are disappointing me.
Kasi yun going back full circle, if the nation is going to do a renaissance of its nationhood, yung national project natin, we have to keep all these ideas emergent.
Right.
Ang nagmamatter na lang dito is that if the other side gaslighting as they sound, do we have a better argument? No? My organization, to IDSE, recently had an international conference whereby we invited US, Chinese, Southeast Asian perspectives. At ang naging feedback kasi doon ng mga people is that we're so happy na finally in Manila, hindi lang, kasi sa current tempo ng Marcos Jr. administration, everything seems to be, sabi nila, puro na pro-West, no? Na parang nagiging sounds like pro-West is Philippine foreign policy na. Sabi namin, hindi, no? The objective of this conference is to lay out the conversation na Chinese perspectives, other Southeast Asian perspectives are welcome. And lo and behold, itong American scholar na in-invite namin, medyo natupi doon sa Chinese perspective kasi ang daming notes na dinala ni scholar from China, no? So, it provides us with the idea na, okay, the Chinese perspective sounds good, but does it benefit Philippine interest? No? So simply as that, no? You may have a good argument, but you have to remember, to put it bluntly, like parang kay Robert Cox, no? Argument is for some purpose and for some country. No? So sa akin, let these ideas flourish in a sense na magbardagulan tayo dito. Pero ang tanong, okay, magandang argumento mo, pero Philippine interest ba yan?
Thank you so much for that. I mean, maybe I'll go to Justin next. Before we go to Miko, I mean, is this a kind of Habermasian communicative action? Let's leave it to reason discussion, or the counter argument will be, well, that's perfect if we're having an Oxford Union debate, but this is different. I mean, there was a hit job on Ambassador Maldes. There were a number of articles on a certain newspaper, right? All of these cartoons really demeaning, actually libelous even attacks on certain individuals. Yours truly, of course, has been a good friend of these people being attacked through and through as being a American boy and all of that nonsense, even though I've been very critical of US throughout the years. Is it really a marketplace of ideas case? Bardagulan na lang at most? Or is this something more nefarious? How do you look at this?
I take a more moderate approach on this marketplace of ideas thing, because I do believe there actually has to be a concerted effort by the government to try to moderate or limit yung foreign influence operations in the Philippines, because there are really what you call useful idiots, in the sense na even if, let's grant, no,
It's not their fault.
They're not being paid by China whatsoever,
Yes,
but
yes.
they will repeat the same talking points, which will have a detrimental strategic effect on Philippine interest, no. Ang favorite way of approaching it is this: the gospel is not the truth until it is evangelized, and in this case, I think there has to be a better strategic communications effort ng government to actually form a baseline. Kailangan natin kasi ng baseline. When I'm hearing some defense commentary from really obscure figures here in the Philippines, for example, they will keep on saying that we need to make peace with China, good relations with China. But, being peaceful with another country, being friendly, is not a foreign policy objective in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right?
And peaceful on whose terms? I mean, just peace,
exactly.
but not a peace that means national humiliation and surrender, yeah.
Yeah, sabi nga ni Ronald Reagan, you can have peace in the next second. It's called surrender, right? And, really, anything worth having is worth fighting for. And that's really the root of all our problems.
Right.
Really, because some people are not comfortable with being uncomfortable. So, for example, we have a laser incident in the West Philippine Sea. Merong close, unsafe encounters in the West Philippine Sea. I'd make the argument that we need to get used to these things, because these things are going to happen further out into the future, because we do have we do have territorial disputes with China. It's undisputed on our end, but they dispute it. So these are facts of life in that part of the South China Sea. So if your only goal is to avoid any sort of conflict whatsoever, then China will have what they call escalation dominance. Kasi you're always chasing after peace. And for me, that does not make for a good defense policy. Sabi nga ni Joshua na, is it really in service of Philippine interest? Because we're balancing peace with other national security objectives, which includes territorial integrity. And how can you have territorial integrity if you're not willing to send a message to your adversaries that you will fight and deter and respond if need be, diba? So I think we need to have that, we need to get that baseline common across everybody. So I do think we need to correct, in fact, the word I use is to correct the opinions of some people here in the Philippines na hindi naman talaga well-informed yung analysis of defense policy because they're not specific about what interest they're trying to fight for. No? Yung making peace with China, for example, this is a given already in the Philippines. So how do you make that an actionable recommendation to Philippine government policy? It's very easy to talk about peace, you should, but how do you make that an actionable policy in light of yung mga disputes natin with China and so forth? How do we strike a good balance wherein we can sleep soundly at night, that we are responding to our national security needs, but at the same time, we're not unnecessarily provoking conflict? So we do have to respond to that, and I think some people need to be corrected.
Yeah.
If I may,
please go ahead, Josh.
muna. Kasi I mentioned kanina yung okay, the argument sounds nice. Is that Philippine interest? Let me promote or plug yung thesis na pinanel ko sa PUP from my students kasi their study was about the Filipino social media influencers, and they used the case study of EDCA. Ang naging findings ng kanilang study is that ang bottom line ng mga nasa middle, nasa parang pro-US or pro-China, after doing a narrative analysis, that they're all concerned for Filipino interest. You would be surprised.
Right.
You would be surprised kasi kung titignan ninyo yung
Right.
gusto nila, they don't want war because, ito, yung sinasabi ni Justin na puro tayo peace, pero yung kung titignan mo yung motive behind it, it's because of the fear of war. Diba? They want peace, tranquil lives. It's just that hindi nila ma-underscore anong klaseng peace, which is something that we need to put into context, no? Sabi nga ni Justin, we have to correct, no? Tama naman sila that in the sense that they want an interest of a quiet life. Pero anong klaseng quiet life? Siyempre, doon nga tayo papasok. So, in other words, yeah, Philippine interest has to be defined by intelligentsia, by the Philippine government, by the entire society. And in a marketplace of ideas, let me put that this way, you have to set the standards pa rin. Hindi to freewheeling everything na pluralism. No? There's always a standard. Right? So parang medyo postmodern, no? Na parang there's still a prison, no? Na by which meron pa rin magko-control nito.
Thanks for that, Josh. I mean, if Justin talks about baseline, I presume a patriotic baseline here. Like, if you love the Philippines, you're not going to be okay with someone just taking away half of your exclusive economic zone. There should be also a ceiling. I always say this. We should go very aggressively against anything that besmirches our Chinoy brothers and sisters. I mean, Rizal had Chinese blood, for heaven's sake. We have to go against anything that is racist, that is xenophobic, because there are really crazy people who want war. Or are playing that game to make themselves look poggy. I'm not gonna name names, but my good friend Ronaldo Llamas talks about the certain people very close to the previous administration, biglang in-endorse si Lenny, and then biglang ngayon, sobrang anti-China and all of that. And then nag-overcorrect, di ba? To a point na is suggesting like, we have to question the loyalty of Chinoy brothers and sisters. That's super wrong. So, there should be a baseline. Like, anything below that, medyo questionable kung mahal mo talagang Pilipinas or may national dignity sense ka. But there has to be absolutely a ceiling. So, speaking of moderation, we have to go against these people who want... I'm even hearing crazy arguments about dapat naging estado na lang tayo na Amerika. Those kind of ridiculous arguments, no? And I've lost count of how many ridiculous... this old American guy coming to me and say, oh, the problem with your government is like, wait. There was one guy I had to correct during my jog in Bag. He's like, wait, before you bash the Philippines, what we have, a bit of that is your legacy. Let's talk about the US. So I'm in that mode. I have no time for nonsense. So the ceiling and the baseline have to be clear. Now, Miko, let's go to you. What is your read on this? Because some are saying there's systematic disinformation here. And the problem with disinformation is, even if they don't convince you to their side, they sow discord, and by besmirching real thought leaders and experts, they're preventing people from having a proper understanding of what's happening. Essentially, they're muddying the water, if not poisoning the well, and that in itself is completely destructive. The reason I'm saying this is there are many studies on Russian disinformation campaign in Europe, and the argument is that it's not that they're pushing really for, I don't know, Marine Le Pen or Trump, but it was more like just confusing people so that they lose trust and confidence and just disengage. Because a cynical and disengaged public is what exactly authoritarian superpowers want. You get what I'm saying? So Miko, what is your take on this? Because the minimum, speaking of baseline, the minimum some are asking is, ganito, okay, kung useful idiot ka, sa'yo na yan. That's on you, right? Okay, you want to make the 1960s argument of the left in 2023, that's your call. But no one is going to take you seriously, anyone serious. But there's some people who maybe should stop pretending that they're objective experts or I don't know, whatever. They should just register that they're a foreign agent, that they are acting in behalf of a national government that is not the Philippine government or something. Because in other countries like Australia and US, all you have to do is kunwari, you're doing an argument about investing in Switzerland or India, right? And you register as the foreign agent of, let's say, Hyderabad or you know what I'm saying? Like that's normal in other country, or at least dapat maging transparent sila. Huwag sila mag-pretend. Yung iba, hindi yung useful idiots. Huwag sila mag-pretend na they're there to make an academic argument. Especially those who barely have any academic credentials to show on West Philippine Sea. That at the very least, magpakatotoo naman kayo. Kung talagang ano naman kayo, aminan na. And then okay na yan. Then go make your argument as the foreign agent. Okay lang yan. And where I'm still willing to listen to you, the same way I'm willing to listen to a Chinese diplomat or a China expert. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you think that baseline, a foreign influence act, baseline transparency is at least what we should do, if not push for a revision of the National Espionage Act?
Yeah, I completely agree, no, that there needs to be some sort of framework that would govern all of this. Because it's no secret. There are political influence operations, yeah, coming from overseas, as other experts have made the argument. I think I'm not quite sure about this, but in other countries, like for example in Singapore, in our case then as well, no, yung owning enterprises such as media, kailangan Filipino talaga yan. But what I think complicates things is the advent nga nitong social media and so on.
Right.
Hindi mo na mag-govern yan in the same way that you could govern newspapers, radio, and
Right.
TV. Sa social media, talagang free for all na. You can have both the views from different
So you're talking about
extremes.
guardrails, Miko, no? Guardrails.
Yeah, right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yung sa social media, ang hirap lagyan ng guardrails. The same way
Right.
that you could place guardrails in the more traditional forms of media. And as Joshua and Justin has mentioned a while ago, yung debate really should be, at the very least, one that talks about interests. Now, to be fair, there is some effort in our, going back sa previous discussion natin, in the Duterte administration as well, to talk about or articulate more clearly what those interests are,
Right.
which should be enduring across different administrations. Governments change on a fairly regular basis, but those interests should be enduring. To be fair, the Duterte administration, through the National Security Policy and Strategy, tried to articulate, and even yung NSP of the current administration has that effort of what those interests are.
Mhm.
But siguro, the thing kasi when we are talking about interest is that it happens in a certain context. And the context, in yung nag-evolve. No?
Right.
Previously, in span of our academic careers, no, we started talking about China in a more positive light and
Right.
opportunity. I remember there are arguments before that China is a country that is focused more internally, yung internal security, arguments such as its Ministry of Interior and so on has a larger budget than the defense. But in the span ng
Well,
ating
it's
careers,
true.
as
It's
short
still
as
true.
it may be,
Yeah, it's still true. Yeah.
nagbago na yon. and nag-i-invest na in China more on externally and so on. So parang yun nga, the context in which our interests uh, as enduring as it should be, nagbabago din yung context. So I think yun yung part ng public discourse that could perhaps sift through the extreme views, no, that are being articulated by others. And that mag-dwell na to more in sa studies on disinformation and so on. And I'll not go into that. Maybe my other analysts could do it better than I can. So I'll stop there.
Well, Miko, I mean, the point is, I still don't care kung anong mas malaking budget because if it's like 350 billion for internal security and 300 billion for external security, that's still scary. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the scale just brings its own quality and threat. So I think that sets...
what I mean, sir, is what I mean by that is that yung argument kasi before is that China, we should not worry about China externally because ang focus niya is internal. But now, it's very clear kasi some are still arguing na there are some still people who are arguing na don't worry about China kasi ang focus niya internal. I mean, true, but it's no secret then that it has regional and even global ambitions.
Or precisely because of domestic instability, it has to become aggressive abroad.
Yung ibang think tanks.
Yeah. No, I know, but the point is you can use that argument and say precisely because they're unstable domestically, they want to have the rallying around the flag effect. So that makes them scary outside. Although I know that even that is debatable, but it's so easy to push back against that. But I remember very well, if you look at Susan Shirk's, for instance, Fragile Superpower more than 10 years ago, she would say that there was a time that China was so sensitive that it said, no, don't say peaceful rise, say peaceful development. This is the Hu Jintao era. But, you know, since Xi Jinping, China is not the same again. In fact, I said, don't call him President Xi Jinping, call him paramount leader or chairman Xi Jinping. He's not your just another Chinese president. This is more like Mao Zedong with the money, as I put it, right? On that note, thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's now go to the favorite episode, last episode. Thank you so much for that. Let's talk about Philippine grand strategy. Ito na, sorry, I mean, napatagal yung ano natin, yung bakery talks natin. Ito na, this is it. Okay. Ito na, medyo sorry, you wanna wear something different kasi grand strategy na tayo, medyo maging mukhang, you wanna put on a coat? Para feeling
Wait lang.
admiral look tayo, yeah. Let's do a slightly different look for this episode. Yeah. 5 minutes break, CR lang tayo. Ito na yung grand strategy, Ito na talaga. Oo, ito na guys, salesman na tayo dito. Benta na. Ito na. Para sa bayan. Ito na talaga.
Entrepreneurs.
Yes, ano na tayo? Okay. You wanna put on a coat or make I don't know, jingle kayo or something? Go ahead.
Sige, wait lang.
2 minutes break Mag-break lang tayo guys, 2 minutes lang. Please go ahead. 1 second lang guys Mag-tsaa lang ako medyo. Thank God, medyo nag-recover naman ako I just need to fix this up. Tita, ito ba yung tsa?
Wala
Ayan na.
akong quote. Wala akong quote.
Naglagay ako ng ano, Naglagay ako ng Philippine flag.
Galing pa akong airport, wala akong dalang coat.
Ayun.
Yeah.
Oh. Nasa na yung mga yan.
Long
Oh.
sleeves.
Nasa kakauwi mo na ng Japan, bro.
Yep.
Oo. Ayos. Uy, paano yung ayos schedule mo sa December? Stand pa rin yun.
Hoy, ingat kayo, naka-live tayo dito on the side ha. Yung audio na narinig. Baka mamaya magmamarites kayo dyan. Okay, fantastic. Let's get this going. Let's wait for yung ating general friend.
Pinabati ko nga pala yung mga estudyante ko.
Okay. Let's go. Aba!
Parang thesis defense lang, brother, ah.
Si Justin yata mag-thesis defense ngayon. Okay. Anyway, let's do this. Okay. Perfect. Alright, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode. Ito na. Medyo we mean business. Okay, we mean this. This episode is about a grand strategy for a middle power, right? And we are talking about, of course, the Philippines, right? Which for a very long time has been, the misnomer has been a small power. I think that's factually problematic and in many ways insulting, or at least confining in terms of ambition. So let's talk about the Philippines. So let's start with you, Miko. Is the Philippines, in your opinion, already a middle power? I mean, at least in terms of like 30 biggest economies, 15 biggest population, some modernization that is happening, the armed forces, almost an upper middle income country. If India can be talked about as a superpower already, despite their very low per capita of barely $3,000, then maybe our $4,000 per capita should not prevent us from going there. I mean, what is your reading on that? What makes us a potential middle power or already an emergent middle power?
Yeah, I think we are an emerging middle power, but not quite there yet. In- we are on our way there.
You want to speak louder? Sorry, Miko. Medyo mahina pa yung boses mo. Yeah. Yes, please speak louder a little bit. Yes, much better now, yeah. Or you want to take out your earphones? Baka mas malakas pa. Hindi naman. Baka maingay. Now better. Okay, yeah, please. Just a little bit louder. Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned a while ago, no, we are on our way there. We are an emergent or emerging middle power, but not quite there yet. Not yet, definitely not yet in the tier of South Korea, Japan, and so on, or Australia even. I think, yun nga, even in yung sa metrics ng Lowy Institute, if I'm not mistaken, we are classified as a middle power. We are at the lower end of that ranking. No? So maybe I'll stop there now. We are emerging, but not there yet.
Okay, we're a nudge lower perhaps. Ikaw, Josh, do you think we're at the cusp or we have already crossed the threshold? It's just that we have to recognize it.
I've had many conversations about this, and ang nangyayari kasi dito sa kanila, ang tingin ng iba dito is that, oh Josh, you're just doing a half full, half empty na argument dito.
Yeah.
Pero ang argument ko dito kasi, if you look at the threshold, we are a low tier middle power. Yun lang, if you were gonna have to nuance it, we're a low tier middle power. We have to put that into context. Hindi naman tayo dapat mag-asta na parang Japan, South Korea, because we're not. Okay?
We're not a full-fledged. I think that, kasi parang we're a small middle power. Like parang labon. Yeah.
Kasi if I want to, so Justin can pitch in on this one and also Miko.
Right.
Kasi when you look at the military power, of course, titignan natin dito, we don't have these capabilities militarily. Pero kung titignan mo yung granularity or ng defense, ng military power natin, ang pinakamataas natin doon is combat experience.
Oh, right.
Hindi natin pinag-uusapan yun.
Right.
I would say,
Right.
kasi ng IR na literature is that we focus so much on the material, but hindi natin ini-include yung non-material. Stephen Biddle in his 2006 book, Military Power, mentioned that as his core argument. When you talk about military power, you also have to take into account yung mga non-quantitative measurements, such as doctrine, force employment.
Sorry for cutting you there, Josh. I think that's why some are saying Ukraine now probably has one of the most powerful land forces in the world. Because they're the most
Exactly,
combat-ready,
diba?
Western-oriented
Oo.
military, right?
Oo.
And they beat the
I
heck
don't know,
out
I
of the
don't know whether
Russians.
Justin and
Yeah.
Nico have their own take on that one. Pero if you look at military power, huwag naman sana tayong tumingin lamang doon sa usual, no? At the surface. Of course, kulang tayo. Dapat natin tandaan yan. Pero look, we have to take into account yung idea na yung adaptability ng ating armed forces. Ako, ay saludo ako sa Armed Forces of the Philippines, particularly
Right.
yung 3 services. Kasi kapag bigyan mo sila ng gamit, they're willing to learn, train with them, adaptable sila. And heck, come on, kung titignan mo yung US Army, they have been so dependent on GPS. Alright? Pero tayo, hindi tayo reliant sa GPS. Kasi, wala tayong GPS na pwedeng gamitin for our for across tactical and operational level. Pero we have been adaptable through map reading. Kung titingnan mo yung US Army basic training right now, naka-rely na nga sila ngayon doon sa map reading. No?
Right.
And gustong-gusto nila itong balikatan sa active army exercises for the reason that
Right.
itong mga Filipinos know how to read the map. Kung titignan mo kasi yung future scenario of a multi-domain warfare, ang argument ko dito, the first thing that will shut down is cyber. Alright? Which means yung information from the global positioning system, it will likely shut down. That's why we have to, it's most likely that our soldiers will rely, or all other soldiers would rely on maps to read. Sa akin, yung ability to read the map, may strategic effect siya.
Right.
No? Of our combat power. No? Yung combat experience natin, we have been so adaptable. In other words, combat power, military power, that usually tinitira na a flaw of being a middle power, I
Right.
would rather differ dito. I think doon muna, no? And at the same time, defense networks, for that reason, yung combat experience natin ay malakas. I would argue, in terms of combat experience, mas efficient tayo compared sa Singaporean armed forces. Right?
Before I go,
So,
that's a very good. Yeah.
So in other words, we're a middle power kung titignan mo na maigi. So hindi ito usapin ng half full, half empty na glass of water, but rather we are inviting everyone to take into the granularity of things. Of course, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-inflate ng mga indicators, but something na sanang tignan natin.
No, I mean, for me, Josh, I think, this is the classic type 1, type 2 error, diba? One type of error is thinking something's there which is not there. The other error is thinking something's not there which is there. And I think here it's like a false negative problem. I don't think the problem is overestimating the Philippines. I think the tendency is actually underestimating the Philippines. I remember there was this, usually my friends make Reddits about me to bash me. And one of the articles they bashed was I had an article about the Philippines as a middle power. Because my argument is very simple. Middle powers are known for 3 things, right? They're coalition builders, so they're good multilateralists, good citizens of the international community. Check tayo dyan. They have a certain degree of credibility, meaning they bring something positive to the table and can get the respect and of others. We have played that role in G7 and 7. We have played that role increasingly even with G7 countries. And lastly is certain level of strategic autonomy, right? Certain level of capability that gives you some, at least close to green water capability. And I would say in one way or another, we're ticking all the boxes, not 10 out of 10, but at least 6 or 7 out of 10. I would say pasado tayo in each of this criteria that is mentioned. Now, speaking of the what you were mentioning, which is very good, which is combat readiness. I remember this whole thing about Philippines beating the American F-22 with an FA-50 in a recent exercises. And a few years ago sa electronic warfare ASEAN-China war games, the Philippines came on top and everyone was shocked.
Exactly.
So when we're given forget about Ferraris, we're just given a low-end BMW, we can beat the Lamborghinis. This is what we have proven over and over again. So it completely proves what you're saying. Yeah.
So i-extend ko lang, no? Yung usual na argument kasi, pag may mga ganitong exchange sa mga militaries natin, usually ang framing is that humihingi tayo ng bagong gamit. Try to put it this way. Nandito sila because they want to learn from what we are doing. It's also transactional. We get the stuff and we should, and they get the training and they get the operational experience. Sana man lang tignan natin yon, lalo na sa mga friends nating mga quote-unquote think tanks.
Sir, if I may just add.
Please, go ahead.
ni Joshua, no? I can confirm na part talaga ng training niya kasi I underwent training this year.
Right.
Yung map reading, and it's a very big part of our military training. And yung not just in sa classroom, of course, may classroom instruction yan, but
Right.
we have a field training exercise where we tried actually in the field, no? Yung map reading.
I think I want to chip in on
Yes,
this
go ahead,
part
Justin,
because,
please.
itong discussion on the middle powers, where I want to reframe the discussion because when we say you're a middle power, it's a broad category, right? Of basically every country that isn't a superpower but is of sizable importance.
It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, yeah.
So it can range from countries like Japan, South Korea, etc., to something like the Philippines, which we all know they're very far apart from each other. So I think the conversation has to be reframed, right? So it's not just what you have, the power that you have, economic, political, military, etc., but it's about grand strategy. Grand strategy has three things, right? Ways, means, and ends. Means, what are the resources you have? Ways, how do you do that? How do you utilize those resources? But more importantly, what are the ends? What is the what is ano yung strategic goals, objectives of the country, right? Now, middle powers have very common objectives like to have a high GDP per capita for its population, to live comfortably, no, yung mga pamilya, to have a good population dividend, and so
Right.
forth. But in the Philippine case, when you look at all our strategic documents, yung ambition natin, 2040, etc., the economic agenda of the Marcos administration, it's very, to be frank about it, it's very basic. No? It's basic aspirational things. Now, kahit tanggalin mo yung Pilipinas from the name of the document, every country in the world wants to have that. So, if we're talking about national interest, I think dapat natin i-correct yun na we need to aspire for some things that are more concrete. No? So, for example,
Right.
yung Singapore, yung strategy niya of attracting yung industrial manufacturing, no, in the 1960s, 70s from first world countries, and then it used that, and then eventually it moved yung supply chain building niya. Now Singapore is an advanced country that's more reliant on capital and technology, right? So yung sa Philippines kasi we don't really see that kind of forward-looking trajectory, the intention of the government. So I think, for example, West Philippine Sea issue, do we have a national commitment that in certain number of years, our goal is to push out China from the maritime zones, a majority of the maritime zones in the West Philippine Sea? And if we don't have it, why not? Because we keep on talking about middle power this, middle power economy, etc. But what's the objective here? Right? Kahit na maging middle power tayo, if China controls important sea lines of communication around our country, what on earth is being middle power for, right? So we have to relate being middle power with a clear set of objectives. That's what I'm talking about.
Kumbaga, Brother Justin, ang sinasabi natin dito is that middle power is just happened because we want to do something for ourselves.
Exactly. Middle power is about it's about power, but what is the purpose that you're going to use that power for? That's the more important thing. Because yung power it's what you have, right? Your means. But what is your aspiration? That's the thing we have to figure out.
Well, speaking of aspiration, I think geography explains a lot. We're smack right in the middle of the first and second island chain, both of which actually China wants to dominate, a little bit more successful in one than the other, right? And to make it even more interesting, we're next to Taiwan, right? Closer to Taipei than any major ASEAN capital. So my argument here is either you go middle power or you go home, right? Or maybe become a province of China. Do you get what I'm arguing? My argument here is we have no choice but to step up. So for almost a century, we have been under this illusion that A, we can just be under America's strategic umbrella and that will take care of everything, and we're not alone. The Japanese have had to deal with that. The Europeans, especially during the Ukraine war, woke up to that reality. The other one is our geography is our blessing. We're so far away from everyone, we're not going to be threatened. Well, guess what? That perhaps explains why we don't have a strong strategic culture because of complacency. But B, actually things are the opposite right now. Our maritime borders are very much the borders that superpowers want to dominate or preserve their dominance. So this is the time where we have no choice. You go up or you go home, right? In this case, go home to China, right? So I think that's the context within which I want to talk about it. Now, let's go to the next issue, grand strategy. Grand strategy. Now, before we can talk about grand strategy, let's talk about some basic capability development. Now, gentlemen, all of you in one way or another work in the Philippines defense establishment. All of us have advised, the defense officials in different capacities. Josh, let me try start with you. Diba Navy ka? What's happening with the Philippine Navy? Because I think the unsung
Hindi,
hero.
I once worked sa AFP, Joint Forces.
Joint Forces,
Force
again,
Manager.
my apologies for that. But my point is, of course, I mean, kasamang Philippine Navy sa AFP, right? Speaking of the Philippine Navy, I mean, the capital ships I saw were not too bad, and it looks like Korea is playing a very, very important role in our acquisition of modern warships. Practically all the modern warships I saw were Korean, except that one was semi-modern, made in Indonesia. But I saw the map for 2028, what the Philippine Navy could look like in 2028, thanks to Korea coming in and helping us. But others are coming. The French are offering submarines. The Americans are offering all sorts of different advanced weaponries. What are we looking at? Are we looking at in the 5 years from now a very different? Like, the reason I'm saying is that, like, I remember when I was young, when you say BGC, it was like just Prince of Jaipur and Embassy Club, right? And then it was like parking lot. 10 years later, it's like a mini Dubai. So that made me realize, do not underestimate the Philippines. Sometimes in a decade, you can see a massive transformation of the country. And the Philippine Navy, compared to 10 years ago, I think has come a long way. And I'm optimistic in the next 5 years, it will still go a long way. Now, Philippine Coast Guard, we talked to some of our friends based in Japan. Their argument is that actually Philippine Coast Guard right now is arguably the best in Southeast Asia, at least in terms of in some dimensions, because of multi-role vessels and some of the improvements we made. So, in short, what I'm saying is that let's not get ahead of ourselves, but stop having this loser, self-deprecating mindset. A loser mindset is what we cannot afford. As I said, you go middle, at least if not big, you go home otherwise, right? So please lang, let's get rid of this loser mindset. But is there a basis to get rid of the loser mindset, Josh?
Kung titignan natin kasi dito, there's a big difference between a defeatist and a skeptic. No,
Right.
kasi ang sa akin kasi dito, when you talk about defense planning,
Very
as
good
part
point.
of the force manager once upon a time na researcher, is that ang problem ko kasi dito is that sa conventional wisdom natin is that when you talk about naval expansion, are we talking about a big flotilla of ships katulad ng Indonesia, if not the United States, of course? Of
Right.
course, the answer is no. But how much is enough? As a fleet, no, na as part of the fleet, the future force structure ng armed forces of the Philippines. And this is something na napaka-difficult na tanong kasi how much is enough? You have to keep asking yourself, but at the same time, the basic answer is just good enough. The question is, how good enough? Ang makakasagot lang nito ay yung political establishment. This is what I want because this is my end goal, sabi nga ni Justin. Okay, if that is the case, then sasabihin ng Philippine Navy as a force provider, this is what we want. But ang nangyayari sa atin, nag-send yung Philippine Navy natin, yung technical working team natin na ito po ang kailangan namin, future fleet designed for, tawag dito, 2012, Philippine Fleet desired fleet mix, yun ang tinatawag nila. Ang problema, oh no, that's a bit too expensive in terms of the capital outlay na expenditure natin.
Right.
So ang gusto kong sabihin dito is that nung sinabi natin that we want this to happen, and then ito yung sinasabi ng military natin, then nabibigla ka. Teka lang, nag-i-step back ka na. Or you don't have any choice but to keep your economy performing so that you can
Sustain.
put the force requirements at the table and realize it doon sa ground, or should I say in water, in the maritime domain, no? So yun yung kailangan natin makita. Ang hindi natin mawawala dito is that yung pag-conflate natin doon sa tinatawag nating skepticism of what we can really achieve versus wala na lang tayong gagawin. Right? So
Very good distinction. I mean, well, I would add also that what we can consider, I mean, your point of reference is actually China, right? That's the problem. What will be even the minimum depends. I mean, if China is building a
Yun nga,
super
diba?
warship every year,
So,
Ang
Yeah,
hirap i-determine what's the
ang sagot
minimum.
ko dito,
Yeah.
it all boils down on forced employment. Who is the threat and where will it be? Tayo muna magsabi, is China a
Yeah.
threat? Kung sinasabi natin friends to all, enemies to none, that's not a good policy guidance for the defense sector. Okay, sabihin na natin, let's play it out.
No, it's a good
Paglaruan natin.
tourism.
Publicly, ikaw na naman, dyan ka na naman. So publicly, sabihin na natin, just to keep our people calm, no problem. Don't designate China as a threat. Pero behind closed doors, at least, dapat nagkakaintindihan tayo sino ba ang piniprepare natin. Kasi defense budget is a lot of money when you just to think about it. Kasi magkakaroon ng ripple effect yan sa training, sa doctrine, sa bibilihin natin. Ang daming trabaho niyan. So, political establishment to. China, is it a military threat? Yes or no? Skeptic ka ba na kakayanin mo and then you surrender? Ang problema, you are a republic. So therefore, you have no choice but to see China vis-a-vis your national interests.
But Josh, I think the question of whether China is an external threat has more or less been established by our national security papers and all.
Ang problema kasi natin dito is that the political establishment kasi, di ba, doesn't want to make a public declaration eh. No?
Yeah.
So it brings slight confusion actually. Sabi nga ni Justin in the previous episode that I think the president has to be more bold in the policy guidance. Kasi yung hedging, for instance, it's a good IR term. I promise you, it's good for the people from the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's a good guidance. But for the national defense
I see what you're
people, it's
saying.
not.
Yeah. Okay, I want to add to this. I mean, and I want to get Miko's point of view and Justin on this. Obviously, it's about dealing with the Chinese threat. Okay, I think it takes a lot of, okay, I want to be nice about this. Medyo gabi na. Baka malusutan na naman tayo. Okay, whatever. It takes a lot of, acrobatics not to see that, right? Or maybe more than acrobatics. But the other thing is, I had this bunch of interviews and discussion with our American friends. Greg Pauling, a very good friend of mine from CSIS. One of the things we mentioned is that the Philippines cannot be an ally of, real estate tenant ally relationship. It has to be an ally that can also provide operational support to the United States. Like, I think at the very least we have to be like, middle powers that can send, to, I don't know, near, Djibouti, right? Like for counter-piracy operation. If not Djibouti, at least, there in Malacca Strait. Do you get what I'm saying? It's also about not projection of power, but projection of responsible, contribution to international security. We want to be also that kind of ally, right? Gentlemen, Miko, maybe Justin first, and then we can go to Miko. Just right? I mean, it's also about that. That's why we need hindi tayo hanggang pwedeng sobrang parochial lang. Strategic parochialism is our problem. We have to look at contributing actively to international peace and security beyond peacekeeping forces deployment.
Yeah, definitely. I think we do have. I think I have a more realistic take on this. No? Why do we send out, for example, contingents of Filipino troops to UN peacekeeping missions? It goes back to the point that actually it contributes to your capability because you give combat experience sometimes to your troops.
Right.
That's the bottom line. We had a Filipino contingent who stood in the Golan Heights. I think 2014, right? They stood up against pressure to capitulate. Militarily, but it gives them valuable experience which we can also use because we have to understand that territorial defense doesn't happen overnight. So for example, if we're preparing for let's assume that if we're preparing for the contingency ng conflict with China, we're never going to have that experience until it happens, right? So what we can do is to try to send out our forces, give them more exposure, how to operate equipment, how to deal with hostile environments, and so forth. So that's the military value of that. So in that sense, hindi lang nga siya values-based foreign policy. It's actually a realistic foreign policy as well for us. I would like to point out though na on the subject ng capability build-up ng Philippines, yung biggest problem kasi natin ngayon is what we have patchwork modernization, meaning patche-patche tayo eh. Like, 4 days ago, si Senator Bato de la Rosa said that, the AFP modernization program from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3, based on data released by DND, is actually way underfunded. No? Yung Horizon 3, the latest one is only funded at 33% of the ideal budget request of DND for next year. So, that in itself is a problem, right? And legislators need to realize that when you fund capability upgrades, hindi pwedeng magpa-prioritize ka lang ng certain something. Because the modernization works as a concept, right? So for example, if we're modernizing the Philippine Navy, and they have, for example, what we call the fortress fleet strategy, meaning to say, aside from yung ships na pinoprocure natin, we're also going to buy coastal defense systems, yung mga missile systems.
Right.
We recently procured one from India, right? All these things, they operate in tandem. Because frankly, we cannot match China ship for ship, resource for resource. That's not an effective use of our resources. No? Mababang karote tayo, right? And China has done that, for example, with Taiwan. Na they intrude into Chinese airspace every day, to the point that Taiwan stopped responding to every incursion because it's a waste of jet fuel, for example. So it's a strategy of strategic exhaustion as well, for their part. So yung Philippine strategy is we need to have a more coherent and well-funded set of modernization. Then finally, I think what needs to be improved is what's the operating concept that we're leading to dito sa modernization of no? Because capability is also about how you employ that force. It's about what you have. And that's the problem we had with China, no? Yung gray zone strategy that yung rules of engagement ng AFP natin is not used to dealing with, for example, suspicious Chinese maritime vessel that is not allegedly tied to the PLA Navy, no? But intelligence say that they really are connected. Yung maritime militia nila really is connected to that. So all these things have to work in tandem, no? The resource has to be there. The concept of how to use that resource has to be there. And I think that's the big problem that we have right now, because right now we still don't have a response, for example, how to deal with yung mga unsafe maneuvers by Chinese ships na kaya nagko-collide sila with the Philippine Coast Guard ships, for example. How do we deal with that, right? Do we make an explicit claim that, hey, if a collision at sea happens, we're going to call in the Mutual Defense Treaty with the US? We actually don't have even the basic guidelines. When are we going to activate Article 4 of the Mutual Defense Treaty, right? We don't have it right now. So we need to think about the specifics of all these things.
Is there a template? I mean, I think the U.S. Navy, was it back in 2019, kind of started treating Chinese militias as extension of the Chinese PLA Navy. So the rules of engagement got updated. President Marcos was in the Pentagon, got the 18-gun salute, whatever. And one of the things they discussed inside the Pentagon was the guidelines of our mutual defense treaty and potentially dealing with cyber attacks and other kind of non-conventional or non-lethal kind of attacks. No, so it looks like we're looking in that direction, right? But I mean, do you have any template in mind in terms of dealing with gray zone strategies, so that China, because China now has the upper hand, they have the initiative. We're still scrambling on how to deal with them. Does Japan provide a template in how they deal in the Senkaku issue? Is there any country that is providing any template on how to deal with gray zone kind of harassment and bullying?
Right. Ako, ang basic approach ko to this
Anyone,
issue,
no? Aside from Justin can also answer. I mean, this is the question for all of us, yeah.
Sure, maybe Miko would like to deal with this.
Miko, you want to go? I mean, again, this is a discussion, so it doesn't have to be one person. Miko,
Kasi,
you have an idea on gray zone?
Kasi Justin already started.
Sige. I'll just make a quick point about this. I think yung response to gray zone, at least for me, is response not to any specific incident, but just a general principle of policy. A policy statement, let's say you put it in a subsequent bilateral defense guideline, that if China purposely sinks a Philippine vessel, then that will make the Philippines activate the Mutual Defense Treaty. Kasi ngayon ambiguous yun eh. Are we going to call the Americans if we have an incident at sea that results in loss of life? We don't have a clear guideline in that. So we need to put it in writing. What's the rules of engagement with respect to the United States? And of course, what is our position, right? Kasi I understand some politicians here are not comfortable making a big issue out of West Philippine Sea incidents, right? Like during the Duterte administration, merong raming incident, some Filipino fishermen were left stranded at sea. What was the political response of the administration is to downplay the incident. And to be frank, that's also a legal thing they could do. They can just play it off in the name of sustaining good relations with China. So we do have to settle first, how do we treat those incidents, especially yung mga military in nature, no? So before kasi fisher boats yung problem natin. Ngayon talaga, there is a real risk that, for example, China might sink one of the Coast Guard vessels or one of the commissioned vessels or the hired vessels were doing para mag-resupply ng BRP Sierra Madre. And we need to make it public what that threshold is going to be.
Right.
Kasi yung lack of threshold na yan, China is taking advantage of that.
Right.
Yeah, if I may add lang, sir, no, I think connected din to dun sa earlier discussion on AFP modernization. I think yung part of our response, or at least our approach, no, to the gray zone issue here, is yung education and training din eh. Kasi it's a critical component of the modernization. Yeah, it's also very important to underscore na it's not just about as na-mention ni Justin kanina, yung we simply cannot match no, yung ship per ship and so on and so on. Yung education and training and even doctrine, it's a critical component of the modernization as well. We must remember kasi it's not very familiar to the general public, maybe as opposed to the police, no, and other civilian organizations. Yung sa AFP kasi, not everyone in the AFP are in the war fighting business. Meron tayong combat, there is combat support, there is logistics, and so on. It is, and yung different fields of specialization within the armed forces. When the military personnel, officers, and enlisted personnel talk to one another, doon mo makikita yung differences of opinion there. So what am I driving at here? It is crucially important na doon sa education and training of our soldiers, sailors, marines, airmen, yung pag-i-impart ng strategic mindset.
Right.
Not just doong part nung of course important in yung mga tactical support, combat support, and so on. Those are important things, so get me wrong. But yung having that strategic mindset, lalo na when they occupy higher positions of command and responsibility, that is very important. Doon ngayon papasok yung importance what Prof. Richard was asking about earlier, yung importance of our engagement with other countries. And yung education ng ating officers, napakahalaga nun, lalo na in this evolving strategic environment in which we find ourselves in. Now, dun sa question ni Sir kanina on gray zone, again, we must remember na hindi lang sa South China Sea nangyayari yung gray zone na yun. It's yun nga, dyan papasok yung political influence operations, yung cyber. I think if I'm not mistaken, just this week, there's somehow a debate ngayon doon sa paggamit ng TikTok. NSC is saying one thing that we should ban it, if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
and then another agency in our government saying we should study it further. So, kasi in other countries, if not mistaken, sa US ata, if you're a government official using a government phone, you're prohibited to have it in your phone. There are similar efforts na dapat daw gawin din natin yun dito. So what am I saying here? There should be a common understanding among the different government agencies. Kasi hindi na lang to DND eh. Yung political influence operations happens across different government agencies and in civil society then as well. How should we, yun nga, sinasabi whole of nation approach and so on. Ano ba yung understanding natin nun, nung gray zone na yun? Kasi sa others kasi, if you don't have that national security lens, you will see those economic and technological initiatives as something benign, or at the very least will not do any harm. But for us, that are looking things from a national security lens, it will cause alarm. Kasi it could have national security implications. So, yun nga, the key point here is yung the importance of education and training. Yes, of our officers and in the armed forces as well, but also yung sa different branches of our government and dun sa general public in general. Yan lang, sir. Thank you.
So sorry, I think it will be good for Josh also to start with this. Okay, so should we look at a porcupine strategy for the Philippines, poison shrimp? Let's say it for what it is, right? Realistically, we cannot match China or even a lot of other countries in the region on a head-to-head basis. But I think we can reasonably go for a kind of a porcupine strategy if that's helping the Taiwanese so far. Why not the Philippines, which has way more population and resources to mobilize when things go south? Hopefully not.
Okay.
But,
Yes. Kasi I want to comment on this one. Perhaps this is a controversial statement, but my argument is this: not all solutions will be naval, right?
Okay.
When I say hindi naval ang sagot, kasi ang argument kasi, the Philippine Army has to be reduced in its budget, give more money to Navy and Air Force. But the point is this: why? It's all about force employment. How are you going to empower unified commands to arrange an order of battle? At ang point dito is that you cannot fight ship to ship against the Chinese.
Yeah.
There will be ang argument. My prognosis will be there can hardly be a decisive Mahanyan battle na nakita natin sa Battle of Midway, Battle of Tsushima, or Battle of Jutland.
Right.
There can hardly be such a thing for the Philippine case. So my point is this: you would understand bakit hindi pa rin natin sinusuko yung bulk of budget sa Philippine Army. No? You will understand that nag-activate na tayo ng territorial defense natin sa Philippine Army. They're transitioning for the very reason that you have to understand perhaps not everything can be solved dito sa may tubig. Ang argument kasi, kailangan dalihin natin yung labanan away from our territory. But the point is this: you can't do that. You have to have a credible ISR capability. You need a good amount of logistics that could sustain that presence out there. Mahirap yun. Mahihirapan tayo. You need a lot of money. I wish we could, but we can't. So, porcupine strategy is something that we can play out, but it has to be underscored for many factors. One for which is that I'm imagining the will to fight ng civilians alongside soldiers. Kasi most
Right.
likely kapag nangyari na may labanan dito sa land, it's gonna be chaotic. Just imagine Metro Manila, papunta pa lang tayo sa work, hassle na. So imagine an urban warfare in Metro Manila. It's gonna be a problem, and that's gonna be a center of gravity para sa enemies natin. Kasi ang magiging operational concept is that you have to capitulate the government, the Philippine government, once that happens. I think we should have learned what happened back in the Second World War. Yun ang nangyari when the Imperial Japanese forces came in, stormed in Central Luzon, northern to Central Luzon. Ang bilis lang kasi plains lang di ba?
Right.
Yung plane lang yung from Lingayen, Pangasinan, papunta dito sa may Metro Manila. So hardly that we can imagine that Metro Manila is the center of everything. We have to understand that we have to empower operational level yung unified commands natin to defend the entire archipelago. And we have to make the enemy guess kung saan ang center of gravity natin.
Very good
Right?
point.
So
Yeah, very
yun.
good point.
Inevitable na magkakaroon ng labanan dito. So we have to understand Philippine Army will still have a good amount of budget aside from the Navy and Air Force. Kailangan joint forces
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point. I think earlier this year there was a massive army exercises dun sa Fort Magsaysay, right? And they were employing Ukraine-style, war tactics, which tells you we are preparing for a potential invasion of Luzon. Should things go ugly, and I think in Balikatan we also had the kind of a flavor of that. So Josh, okay, you're saying it shouldn't be Philippine Navy only, but given how historically there has been overemphasis on land warfare capability because of internal insurgency, don't you think that you need a certain level of Navy first kind of mindset para lang maayos natin, ma-offset natin itong historical imbalances?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? There's a value to exaggerating the role of Philippine Navy given its historical
I
disadvantage.
think ang argument ko dito, this is where you have to understand your limits. Ang prognosis ko kasi dito is that limited talaga ang seapower natin. I don't think that in an event of an open conflict, the order of battle will be that we would have a good amount of principal combat surface capabilities, let alone 2 pieces of submarines in the order of battle. Come on, let's not kid ourselves here. So perhaps if
I
you
see.
want to have an advantage over sea, perhaps you can leverage on naval mines. Pero maraming usapin on environmental catastrophe, of course.
Yeah.
So sa akin, pasensyahan na sa mga tropa natin dito. Pero I'm just being realistic here na may hirapan tayo even if we achieve yung desired fleet force mix natin sa 2028, it's still not enough. That is why operational level commands, unified commands, has to be empowered on how to be creative. You know,
Mm.
let not the president nor the secretary of national defense decide on what kind of tactics they should employ. Let NOLCOM, let Westcom do this, and trust that they will do this in the interest of the republic. So may level of civil military relations dynamic dito.
Josh, let me push back against that a little bit. Again, this is for the sake of discussion. Well, we live in an era of A2AD. We live in an era of asymmetric capabilities. We live in an era of anti-cruise missile capability. We live in an era of swarming strategies. We see, for instance, Iran deploying that quite effectively in the Persian Gulf, right? They're facing the most powerful navy in the world, but they can pose a counter threat should things get ugly. I mean, my point here is that the invention of drones, or the drone warfare we saw in Azerbaijan, Armenia, in Ukraine, Russia. My sense is I completely agree with you that that idea of set piece battle in the high seas. Yeah, forget about that. But Philippine Navy having a lot of drones, anti-cruise capability,
Yeah.
things China is doing to the US right now, or Iran is doing to the US. I
Yeah.
think we can go down that road
Yeah,
too, right?
yeah,
Against
yeah,
China.
exactly.
The Vietnamists are doing
Yeah,
that.
I think in principle, Richard, I agree with you in that idea. Kasi an ideal force structure, sabi ng Australian General si Mick Ryan in his book, na an ideal force structure should be a combination of fire and forget autonomous weapon systems, and at the same time,
Right.
ito mga flashy, expensive na mga man capabilities natin. Kasi, ang sa akin kasi, parang ang nangyayari kasi dito is that parang ang sinasabi mo kasi dito, Richard, is that there's a scenario whereby we're all on this alone.
Yeah.
Indeed, I think we have a unilateral defense plan, as tweeted ni Justin, na hindi pinag-uusapan. No?
Interesting.
There's another scenario then that we have to consider, that the United States will be there. So sa akin kasi, perhaps the reason I mentioned that is that I'm assuming that I'm letting the United States Navy, 7th Fleet, handle the high seas battle, and according to our national interests, protect our own sea lanes and increase our command and control capabilities with the Americans so that they can control the rest of the high sea concerns and let our territorial archipelagic security intact. So yun yung aking assumption on this one. Yeah, but yeah, drones, swarming tactics is a good way to cover large enough coastlines na kailangan nating compensate.
Yeah. Justin, you want to talk about that lonely
Yeah.
fight scenario apocalypse? Yeah.
Yeah. I think before I get to that question, yung porcupine strategy kasi meron ding internal debate yan with itself, right? Do you acquire yung mga mention nga ni Joshua, flashy, cost investment heavy equipment, or yung what they call a large number of small things, like, which is the Ukrainian strategy, right? And I would actually argue that hindi siya 100% applicable to the Philippine case because we don't have land battles in the immediate area that's going to be attacked by China in a contingency. So we're
Right.
talking of naval battles here, which are
Yeah.
essentially capital intensive heavy battles. So you're talking about corvettes, you're talking about your surface fleet, ranged fires, yung mga missile system, air defenses, and so forth. Yung mga bagay na yun, these things we need to invest on. So we cannot have modernization on the cheap. No? Hindi tayo pwede magtipid dito talaga. And to begin with, any self-respecting country should have missile defense systems to begin with. So the idea that the AFP is being a drain on the resources of the country is actually should be put into perspective. It's not even 3% of our GDP, which is more in line with our regional neighbors. No, so that's one thing. In terms of yung point on a scenario wherein we do have to fight unilaterally. No, the AFP calls that the unilateral defense plan. And there is actually that contingency na let's assume that the United States doesn't come to the aid of the Philippines. We should be prepared for that. And it's not something, ang spin kasi dyan, the United States is an unreliable ally and so forth. But any self-respecting country should be able to defend its national territory on its own, right? And we should have that capability. And the problem is, those advocating for a position na we need to be friends with China, they're also not advocating for beefing up the capabilities of our military.
Right.
So I would be perfectly fine with it if they advocate that yes, you should have a large navy, yes, you should use that navy to counter China's growing expansion. But the problem is, ginagawa nilang bundle na to make peace with China, you have to sort of neuter your military. You
Yeah.
have to, you have to,
Appeasement.
yeah,
Self-mutilation, medyo ang hinahanap
yes.
nila, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good term for it, self-mutilation. So, in that sense, no, yung porcupine strategy natin should be, frankly speaking, maximizing the costs for China. It's really A to A D, it's area and access denial for China.
Yeah.
That's really what it is, no. It's to make sure that even if we can't meet them ship for ship in, let's say, the West Philippine Sea, we do have capabilities to neutralize them, such as yung mga shore-based missile batteries and so forth, which we are actually procuring right now. So we are heading in the right direction. It's a question of whether we do have the funding for it. That's it from a capability standpoint.
Fantastic. We're already approaching 3 hours of conversation. I can see na drain tayo. I still had many questions. I have notes here and all. I want to talk about the Goldilocks alliance with the United States. I want to talk about the whole thing. In fact, the grand strategy, balikan natin. But maybe we can wrap up the episode here because sumusoko na yung mga followers natin. Although, I mean, some of our followers were even pointed out yung exercise actually was Cope Thunder exercise. I think sinasabi ko na, yung natalo natin ng F-22, di ba? So, you can see, people watching us know a thing or two. So, I'm very glad na natutuwan tao sa discussion natin, almost 3 hours. Maybe just some final points to wrap up this episode. So, I don't know, Poison Shrimp meets A2AD meets Porcupine. What are we looking at here? Miko, maybe I'll start with you before I go to Josh and Justin for closing remarks. For this really fascinating episode. We're already talking about apocalyptic scenarios, but this is what I don't think economics is the real grim science. Ours is the grimmest of sciences, right? War studies and international affairs. Go ahead, Miko.
Yeah, this has been a very fascinating conversation. I mean, the inputs and the perspectives that user and Justin and Joshua has raised are really very interesting and indeed very helpful for the defense planners. What I'll say though is this briefly, and I'll jump off where Justin has left off. No? The important thing, I guess, here is that coming from a military background is always prepare for the worst case scenarios.
Right.
Of course we could hope for the best, but preparing for what could happen in the future, yung worst case scenarios, what will happen if the US will not come to our assistance. These are all very important areas in which our planners should be also focusing on. No? I will not go into the details as an active officer. I am talking to my superiors, but what I'll say though is this: yung importance. It is also important to highlight na in the last two administrations, yung defense planning is going a bit more institutionalized as opposed to before. To be fair to the middle level managers of our defense establishment and the armed forces, talagang may effort naman talaga na to institutionalize defense planning. And to be fair, I mentioned this in the previous episodes na yung Duterte administration, for all of the noise that we have heard, no, I mean, in the 6 years that it was in power, it is very important also to underscore na yung Duterte administration had, I think, yung very sequential planning. It started with an NSP for the first time in our history, nagkaroon ng NSS, and we had an NDS. Tapos, ito hindi ito masyadong napag-uusapan sa public, we had a national military strategy then under the Duterte administration. Although, just a footnote here, we also had a national military strategy in the Aquino administration, but the problem was we did not have an NSS and an NDS during that time. So what I'm driving at here is that while there is still work to be done, yung yung ginagawa ng mga middle-level managers in our defense establishment to institutionalize all of this planning. There is what we call, I mean, Justin knows this, coming from the planning office of the DND, yung Defense System of Management. Talagang this is a product of the JTA assessment during the Arroyo administration. Na to be fair, it's been 2003 ata yun, if I'm not mistaken. It's now 2023. Ini-institutionalize pa rin yun hanggang ngayon. So again, to give credit dun sa mga individuals or bureaucrats who the public may not know or may never know. May not be as popular or as prominent as other officials, but they are doing the efforts na may not be fully appreciated by the public. So I'll stop there, sir.
Thank you. So they may not be as popular as Robin Hood and Bato, but they're doing their job. Okay, just to spice it up. Josh, the last points?
Well, ang pag pinag-uusapan kasi natin itong AFP modernization na magastos talaga siya. Inevitable sa isang republic na mag-spend. Actually, hindi nga siya expenditure. I love my undergrad economics professor. Sabi niya, these things are not expenses. These are investments. Diba? So, national defense is an investment for a purpose. Ang tanong, bakit natin gagawin to? It's a good thing to say na poprotektahan natin ang territorial integrity, sovereignty. Pero it's also a question, for what purpose? What do you want? Diba? So
Right.
every time we talk about these strategies, please understand, mga kababayan, na hindi tayo nagsusow ng war dito. Pinag-uusapan natin dito is that if dumating yung mga scenarios na ayaw natin, while at the same time, may mga gusto tayong gawin sa buhay, what are we gonna do about it? And what are we willing to sacrifice? It's better to invest now, no? I sound like a financial planner na nagbebenta ng policy. Pero usapin kasi ito ng ating what we hold dear as a republic. As I mentioned in the previous episode, bata pa ang republika. Bata pa lang tayo, mangarap na tayo, no? Ang mga pangarap natin, dapat it has to be backed up with capabilities. Hindi tayo nagde-daydreaming. Itigil na natin ang huwan tamad principle na sana ang kapayapaan at kaunlaran ay darating na lamang. As much as we want that we want to have a serene na waters for our fishers to have, others have a vote. Hindi porke ito yung gusto mong version of future, mangyayari yan. A future will always be contested. The question will be, what kind of future do you want? That is why we lay out these planning, scenarios, wargaming, discussions, bardagulan, marketplace of ideas. It's because we all want the same thing. That is
Right.
Philippine interest to be upheld for a young republic such as ours. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Josh. And Justin, last points?
Yeah, last point for me, ito, prepare ko to. Before we had this discussion, I thought, what do I want to impart to the readers? And for me, it's very simple. We've talked about the technical side of defense planning, but I wanted my point to be on the political rationale. Bakit nga ba natin ginagawa lahat ito, no? And for me, it's a simple fact that contrary to the rhetoric we're hearing out there, we are not being dragged into conflict. We ourselves already are in conflict. Deny it as much as we want, no? Whether or not nandito yung United States, we will have tensions with China, no? Look no
Right.
further than the 2012 Scarborough Shoal incident, no? Bakit nga ba nagsimula itong whole history of our tensions with China? The Philippine Navy and Coast Guard tried to interdict illegal Chinese fishers in our exclusive economic zone, which China tried to deny, right? So in short, it is trying to deny a sovereign function of the Philippine government.
Right.
So, hindi natin mawi-wish away yung mga tensions na to. So we need to prepare for them, no? So that's really why we're doing what we are doing, no? All these tensions, nagsimula yan just between us and China. The US is an addition to that story because the Philippines tried to, bring them in, and up to today we're still doing that. But when you look at how this story began, it's between us and China, and that's the important takeaway that we have to focus on here. So I like to end with a quote, no? If you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. And I think that's what's important here. We need to be clear about what is it we're standing up for, what's the floor, what's the ceiling of our defense policy, why we're doing what we're doing, and how do we respond to these threats to territorial integrity. It's also a respect not just to ourselves, but to previous generations of Filipinos and also to those yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Parang politikong speech yun, but that was really good. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. I can see a lot of excitement and support. Believe me or not, there's still some people following us. Almost 3 hours of conversation. If it were not for Friday traffic and a long day and my colds and all, I'm sure I don't mind doing Joe Rogan for 5 hours even. But just that tells you, no, that tells you how much more there is to discuss. I'm already thinking about next episode on Philippine-US alliance, how to make it the best possible alliance. I'm already thinking about Philippines and the middle powers like Japan and India. I'm already thinking about how to get it right with China. So the discussions are so enriched that it nanganganak sila ng mga topics already at the back of my mind, no? So thank you so much for sharing your voice. Thank you so much also for everyone supporting us. Thankfully, I mean, some people made kind contributions online and all, which we'll use for the editing and just setting this up. So I really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to more of this, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Miko Galang, Justin Bakisal, and Joshua Espena. And looking forward also to be joined by other folks in the future as we discuss the Philippines' foreign policy and defense policy in the 21st century. Maraming salamat. God bless and have a happy weekend, gentlemen. Thank you.
God bless everyone. Bye-bye.
Salamat.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a picture before you folks leave. Okay, stop recording. Okay, sorry. Nanervous ako. I thought nawala yung recording. Like, thank you. 1, 2, 3. Yan. Para sa bayan. Alright. Let's work out the logistics and all. Papa-edit ko muna yung mga videos and all. Siguro by
Wait
next
lang.
week, hopefully I'll get it out. Thank you
Dapat
so
pang
much.
PUP style. Para sa bayan.
Well, sino Well, mamaya ganyan ang lalabas
Ay,
yan.
ganun
Patay tayo
dapat,
dyan.
ganun.
Alright. Thank you so much, guys. Talk to you soon. Salamat.
Alright, bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
Good night.
Thanks, Macon. Thanks, Justin.
Very
Thanks,
good,
Richard.
very good discussion. Woo. Ay, andyan pala kayo. Thank you so much sa lahat ng mga sumuporta sa atin. My goodness, I mean, talagang alam niyo, mahal natin ang bayan natin. Naka 1 hour interview nga tayo kay Senator De Lima kanina. Ito, 3 hours discussions for multiple episodes. So don't worry mga comments, upload natin separately. Papa-edit ko pa yan. We have to come up with their logo, etc. So officially na-launch na namin itong latest podcast natin para sa bayan, no? To discuss West Philippine Sea, Philippine foreign policy, and much more, much more. So thank you very much for your support, for your love, and I really appreciate it. Have a restful Friday traffic night, and talk to you soon. God bless.